this person is coming, and they actually people turn up. And I think it's something we also haven't done, which is who are the global champions when you say this. The Africans in diaspora, we have 2, 10, or 20 really top people whose names, when they are mentioned, everyone knows who they are, and people will actually turn up because they are interested in meeting them. The other one, finally, of course, we are talking, like I said, we have our ambassadors in New York. One of the things we are hoping to do with them is mobilize all the African ambassadors to the UN. Now, with all its failings and other things, but all countries as ambassadors to the UN, and they are close to one of the largest diasporas in the world, which is in North America and South America, as well as in the Caribbean. I think they could serve really as a good vehicle for us to reach the African diaspora and actually enable them then to contribute to the development of the continent, whether we're looking at it from the issues around education, or the issues around research and development, or the issues of building really a technological industrial base, or maybe similar issues, including actually putting pressure on some of the superpowers when they are developing policies so that they can actually contribute to Africa's advancement and not just undermine the continent. So I think, like many people have already said. So maybe for now, I'll stop here. Mampi.
Thank you very much, Victor, for coming through with that presentation. If any of you would like to follow the diaspora, the STI Coalition, you can just perhaps Google STI Coalition for Africa. We'll soon open a call for friends of the coalition to join and contribute to Africa's development, whether you are in the diaspora, especially if you're a scientist in the diaspora, I would like to hear from you, but also multilateral bodies that would like to partner with the coalition would be most welcome. So thank you very much, Victor, for that. And if any of you also would like to get the concept, a copy of the concept document for the diaspora, you can get in touch with any of us at the DSI, and we will share that with you. So next up we have Dr. Martha Phiri, Director of Human Capital, Youth and Skills Development from the African Development Bank. Are you there, Dr. Phiri? All right, I'm going to move on to Ms. Lily Sanya, and then if Dr. Phiri is online, she can alert us and we can go back to her. But for now, let's please welcome Ms. Lily Sanya from IOM. Thanks.
Good afternoon, colleagues. I wish to thank you for this opportunity to make some interventions. Madam Mampe from the Department of Science and Innovation, and good afternoon to all of you. My name is Lily Sanya. I'm from the International Organization for Migration, and I want to come into this conversation just from the point of highlighting that as IOM we've been involved in dealing with diaspora for over 6 decades, and of course this comes from the work that we have done. We've worked by supporting to resettle people to different countries, taking people out of harm's way, and so to a large extent contributed to the creating of these diaspora communities. And then secondly, one of the things that we wish to note, or we've noted in the work that we've done, when we talk about diaspora, it's important to note that we are talking about a group that is not homogeneous. We talk about a group that could contribute to development, but in essence, they are not homogeneous. So we try to proffer solutions to governments in terms of how they can engage with their diaspora. And some of the work that we've done as the International Organization for Migration when it comes to this is we have tried to get governments to have an understanding on where their diaspora is, and the previous colleague talked to that, and so I wouldn't want to go into detail, but basically trying to map and get an understanding on where the diaspora of a particular country is, and also just look at it from programmatic solutions. So for instance, since 1974, IOM was involved with working with governments on the African continent to support the return of qualified African nationals. And that program happened because governments were trying to see how they could leverage the skills that their diaspora had acquired while abroad by coming back to work in their countries of origin. So that was a really a big program that we did, and governments then, when people came back, were able to place their diasporas into their ministries to work and contribute to providing the requisite skills that were needed. And then further on, we worked on programs on migration for development for Africa. And basically, again, this is a way of linking the diaspora with their countries. And we come in from the premise that diaspora have capital, and that capital can be used to leverage or to develop countries. And we look at capital from the perspective of financial capital, and this is a big one, and this is one that many countries celebrate when they talk about the remittances that have been sent back by their diaspora to the countries. And when we look at sub-Saharan Africa in particular, and we reflect on the contributions that have been made in terms of the financial remittances. Last year, in 2022, we had about $53 billion that were remitted onto the continent, with countries like Nigeria having about 38% of that lion's share, about $20 billion. Countries like Ghana having about 4.3, countries like Kenya having about 4.1, and even last year we took note that South Africa also, when you look at the remittances that have been shown by the World Bank, South Africa also had financial remittances of about 900 billion. So that is celebrated. But then we also do have other capital. So when we are talking about the diaspora and what they can contribute, we also talk about intellectual capital. And I think this is where we are having this conversation about how we can leverage on the skills of the diaspora from a perspective of mobility. And then the other capital that we can look at is also cultural. We are talking about a group of people that have moved to another country, but they maintain their ties with their countries of origin. And they form a community that we could refer to as a transnational community. And so for them, it's very easy for them to move between these two countries because they have an understanding of their cultural norms of the countries of origin, and then they also have an understanding of the norms of the countries that they go into. So, and then of course, also we talk about social ties. And when you look at a lot of the work that has been done, the focus has been on diaspora contributing to alleviating poverty. And most of the money that is remitted to countries back home, it's people sending money back home to their family members, either for consumption purposes, for education, and for health. So using that approach, I mean, it's easy to recognize that the diaspora is a group that can contribute to development if it is if they are well engaged. In the sessions today, in the morning, there were 2 points that were highlighted, which are really important in this discourse that we are having. That is engaging the diaspora to build trust. And the other point that was made earlier was that the diaspora can play an important role when it comes also to the capital in terms of politics, where they can play a role either in multilateralism and etc. But again, we also acknowledge that there are some diaspora members who who leave their countries because they are disenfranchised. So the element of building trust then becomes very, very critical. So in the work that we do, we try to also then encourage governments to engage their diaspora, to ensure that they are also giving them opportunities. So like the element around empowering is also important. And so this is where the government can also play a critical role by providing incentives for their for their diaspora to contribute to development. And there are several countries in Africa we could refer to if we think about some examples that we are aware of. For instance, we can think about countries like Ethiopia, where we've had their diaspora that was really involved in contributing to the development when they were constructing the dam. We can think about the Rwandese diaspora, the Congolese diaspora that has played a big role in strengthening their health systems. And then the final point that I would like to bring into this conversation when we are looking at how the diaspora can contribute, we are now talking about the fourth industrial revolution, so we are talking about technology and how we can leverage on technology to use the diaspora to contribute to development. We know that there may be some diaspora communities that have ties to their countries, but they've also made a life elsewhere, and they are not ready to return back home in a permanent way, but then they are willing to contribute to development in their country using technology. And so the areas where we've also seen this is in education, where you use those digital platforms or the technology to be able to teach even virtually. And of course, COVID fast-tracked us into that. We're also talking about telemedicine, where we are also using the technology to support or for the diaspora to contribute to development in their countries. And I would just like to stop and take a pause here and look forward to engaging with you after this.
Thank you very much, Ms. Sanya. I think from the two presentations, we can clearly get a picture of what at least these two organizations are doing to tap into the skills and expertise of the diaspora. And I think the challenge is how do we strengthen this existing mechanism so that we don't reinvent the wheel and start from scratch.
Chairperson.
I'm coming to you, Martha. I have been
thank you.
That you are
thank
online.
You.
So yeah, perhaps as part of the declaration, we need to look at existing mechanisms and perhaps mention some of the ones that have been presented today to elevate them to become some of the continental platforms to engage the diaspora. So having said that, I'd then like to bring in Dr. Martha Piri from the African Development Bank. Over to you, Madam.
Chairperson, you will excuse me. I think we all went to lunch and somehow I lost count of time. I hope you can hear me, Chairperson.
Yes, we can hear you. Apologies for that. We did lose out on some time, but we are back in session now. Over to you.
Thank you. So allow me, Your Excellencies, of course, and participants to this very important event, allow me to stand on established protocol and really express, excitement on my part to join this panel on behalf of the African Development Bank. And I wish to thank the organizers for inviting the bank. So the conversation on Pan-Africanism, science, knowledge, and technology in the context of diaspora's contribution to the continent's development could not have come at a more timelier occasion than this moment, as we look forward to the African Union Year of Education, and of course next year, and of course commemorate the establishment of the organization. Studies have shown us that no society has achieved sustainable socio-economic transformation without investing in the scientific, technological, and innovative capabilities of its people. Unfortunately, while some progress has been made, the COVID-19 pandemic showed us that Africa is not investing enough in science, technology, research, and innovation. The pandemic, for example, showed us that manufacturing only 1% of vaccines is nowhere near minimum security level of supply that we need in case of similar pandemics. And it's not a question of if, it's a question of when we'll have another major pandemic like COVID. So this should not come as a surprise. When you look at only, the numbers are very clear. On the continent, we have 198 scientists per million people, compared to countries like Brazil and United States, for instance. They have 656 and 4,500 per million people, respectively. Africa's investment in science and technology across the entire education system is massively lagging behind other regions, of course. In the specific case of higher education, where the African Development Bank focuses on, enrollment on average is under 10% in engineering and in natural sciences, mathematics, and statistics, and under 5% in information and communication technologies. This calls for upscaling of investment, and quickly so, in STEM, so that we can build a critical mass of scientists, if you allow me to use that word, engineers, researchers, and tech experts, to ensure that the continent has minimum security of supply of essential services, but also capacity to innovate, create value, and trade on the continent. So someone would ask, what do these numbers, statistics, have to do with the diaspora? A lot, actually. Data shows that an estimated 40.5 million Africans live outside their home country. Among these, and by the way, this is a very narrow definition. I'm very mindful of all our people in the Caribbean and other parts of the, of the globe. So among these diaspora, this diaspora community, we have world-class scientists, world-class engineers, digital experts, researchers, innovators, financiers, and investors. Furthermore, the diaspora constitutes the largest source of financing for Africa. In 2022, for instance, remittance flows to Africa reached $100 billion, while official development assistance was only $34 billion. So you can see that official traditional financing mechanisms are slowing down and remittances are growing. Well, what these numbers show us is that building a strong partnership with the diaspora in the area of science, knowledge, and technology is actually an economic imperative. It goes beyond the emotional attachments that we all feel. It is an economic imperative. It has potential to deepen scientific knowledge, catalyze innovation, create and build value on the continent, to promote intra-Africa investment and trade, and create quality jobs for our young people. To promote a win-win partnership Governments need then to create an enabling environment that will incentivize the diaspora participation in building Africa's next generation of scientists, engineers, innovators, and successful entrepreneurs. Governments need to develop clear strategies, adopt evidence-based policy reforms, and instruments for promoting diaspora engagement in the area of knowledge and technology transfer, service provision, learning. Governments need to focus on reducing the high transfer costs of remittances in the short to medium term. For instance, if you look at Africa, sending $200 to Africa will cost about 8.5% of the amount transferred, compared to less than 6% globally. Of course, one of the factors driving transfer costs is the lack of interoperability, which prevents customers to transact outside the network created by their own financial services providers. Beyond remittances, of course, there is diaspora bonds that can be promoted in order to utilize them as development capital. So what does the African Development Bank do to support Africans in this space? And how can we leverage that to promote this agenda? The bank has what we call the Jobs for Youth in Africa strategy and Skills for Employability and Productivity in Africa action plan. Through this action plan, we support African countries to build infrastructure for expanding access to science, technology, engineering, and mathematics in both higher education as well as technical vocational and education training levels. Digital skills, online learning, and entrepreneurship skills are central to the action plan. The goal is to fill the skills gap in STEM and address skills mismatches that we see on the continent. And the emphasis is to develop industry-oriented skills that are needed in priority value chains and to harness youth entrepreneurship so as to position our countries on the continent to effectively participate in the Africa Continental Free Trade Agreement. Under the action plan, we also work with universities and training providers to develop relevant curricula in partnership with the industry. To ensure sustainability, the emphasis is on climate smart and gender responsive curricula. Against the backdrop of such acute shortage of scientific experts and enormous development financing gaps, digital innovations present huge opportunities to tap into the diaspora scientific and technological expertise. The diaspora can use digital applications and platforms to provide paid or even free services as the case may be, and also to invest in the African market while seated and operating in their countries of residence. To tap from this intellectual capital of the African diaspora, the bank organizes what we call Science, Technology, and Innovation Forum regularly. We have so far organized 3 since 2022, and we'll be organizing the next one next year, to which you are all invited, of course. These landmark forums that draw nearly 1,000 policymakers, academics, industry practitioners have offered an opportunity for the diaspora to share best practices in science, technology, and innovation. To facilitate easy transfer of remittances and reduce related costs, the African Development Bank is supporting African countries in 3 main ways: strengthening payment systems and enhancing interoperability within and across African countries. Lastly, allow me, Chairperson, to speak about the elephant in the room. We have heard our young people talk about the high youth unemployment that we see. This is perhaps the biggest, one of the biggest, if not the biggest, challenges that the continent faces now. So what are we doing at the African Development Bank? In line with the Jobs for Youth in Africa strategy, we are being very deliberate about taking an ecosystem approach that emphasizes public-private partnerships in mobilizing financing and non-financing services to support young entrepreneurs at scale in a way that allows them to start and grow their business so that they can be job creators and not job hunters. In talking to government and partners, we see that the current models that promote young entrepreneurship through the government budget are not sustainable. So we are supporting countries to mobilize patient capital from development partners, philanthropic organizations, and of course mobilize private sector capital to support youth to start and scale their businesses in areas that excite them, of course, including in digital innovations. We have such programs in Nigeria, Senegal, Rwanda, Togo, Cape Verde, and with a number of countries in the pipeline. We see the diaspora as key partners in investing in these youth businesses, both as venture capitalists and of course bringing their knowledge and technical know-how to build capacity and provide enterprise support as mentors, incubators, accelerators, and facilitators of market linkages. On that note, Chairperson, allow me to thank you again and thank everybody for their attention. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Piri, for that very insightful presentation. So it struck me as the three presenters were speaking that there is a lot happening in the continent. We're almost all working towards the same goal, but I'm not sure if we are working together. And I'd like to pose a question to the three panelists, just to indicate from what they've heard from the other panelists, how they either work together already or how they see opportunities to work together, not just with the three panelists or among the three panelists, but with governments as well. And I'll start with you, Madam Sanya, and then Victor, and then back to you, Dr. Piri. But to Victor also, Dr. Piri spoke about STI Fora, annual STI Fora. UNECA has annual STI Fora. So what are the opportunities there? I also know, Victor, that we speak a lot about supporting entrepreneurs and bringing the private sector. Dr. Piri spoke about the triple Ps, mobilizing financing. So how can you draw together to tap into the diaspora without replicating what exists elsewhere? Ms. Sanya, starting with you, please.
Thank you very much for that question. And I'm really excited to pronounce that the International Organization for Migration at Addis Ababa level, in collaboration with the African Development Bank, just signed an MOU this week, I think, this week, yeah. And it is to collaborate on engaging with the diaspora. So this is from a very practical perspective that we realize we cannot work alone. And when it comes to issues which are related to migration, and obviously we recognize that migration is a development enabler and through diaspora. And so this is one very practical way that we realize that partnerships are key. And this would be an opportunity for us to see. It's not, remember, we don't work as an organization, but we work to serve member states. So this will be an opportunity that we can look at and see how we can work together.
Thank you very much, Ms. Sanya. South Africa would also like to strengthen its partnership with IE Venezuela. Victor, if you can respond to some of what I had indicated earlier, and then go to Dr. Piri, and I'll allow for 2 questions from the floor. Victor?
Okay, thank you very much. So maybe I will start with the one on the private sector. I mean, I think if we are going to grow, everyone is talking about youth unemployment. We are talking about right now almost 420 million that are unemployed. So the numbers, we need to move beyond whether we supported one person or 2 people to how do we do that at scale. And I think part of my answer will really be trying to address that. So with the private sector, one of the things we're trying to do, for example, an experiment with Kenya, is how do we get the private sector to fund innovators that are likely to grow beyond even just their businesses, beyond their countries. So one example is what we are doing at the Project Origin with the Mamkimathi University, and they have developed basically a venture-based master's degree. And with that, they come with a backing of about $300,000 each. If you can come up with a business idea that you think you can actually grow it beyond Kenya, they will be happy. The private sector partner will be happy to fund it. For them, they are building a market where their money will go in future. And for development, of course, we are trying to see how do we expand, for example, the benefits from the regional markets. And I think that's something perhaps we see how it works and how we can get the other maybe partners to adopt similar approaches. Then, of course, on entrepreneurship, in addition to that, on entrepreneurship, we're also trying to encourage all the African universities through the Alliance of Entrepreneurial Universities in Africa to actually become, we are not thinking everyone should become a job creator like people are saying it, because I don't think that makes sense. What we are thinking is some people will be job creators, they could create the businesses and everything else, but we also want to make sure that the people who go in the civil service, the people who work in the business sector, in the social, I don't know whether they're running NGOs or something, they should think entrepreneurial. And therefore, if we can empower everyone actually to think entrepreneurial, we move the development needle a little bit further. So we are actually encouraging universities that they must provide entrepreneurship support to almost all their students. And partly the reason we're starting from the top is we may not like it, but your universities train everyone else who goes to train everybody else. So the teachers come from there, they're teaching at colleges or secondary schools. So that's an effort we are hoping all of you can join us and drive it. And actually tomorrow I have a meeting with the colleagues that are running, which brings me to the next one, how you collaborate with everybody else. We're actually having a meeting with the colleagues that are running the global entrepreneurship promotion thing for universities, because they found out what we are doing and can we work together. I'm like, absolutely, why not? So that brings me to the forum. Yes, we have the Africa Regional Science, Technology and Innovation Forum, whose input goes into the Africa Regional Forum on Sustainable Development, and ends up at the high-level political forum in New York. And we actually have invited everyone, the African Development Bank, several times to work with us, and we are inviting them right now to come and work with us. This will be, if I'm not mistaken, Mampe and I know very well, we've been working together on it for now, I think this will be the 6th session, and work together with the African Union. Actually, the African Union already reached out to us to say when it's happening and what are we doing around it. And also we have the African Business Forum taking place at the tail end of the African Union Heads of States and Government Summit. That we are being supported by Google, and we hope some of our colleagues in the diaspora that are really interested can actually come. If you are doing things around the science, and its focus this time for the Africa Business Forum will be on science, technology and innovation. And so all of you are here, sure, you should perhaps really come, and I'm happy to work with everyone that is interested in driving that. Like I said, the Africa's problems are pretty big. We need to move from beyond helping one person or one institutions, because if we're going to create jobs for, I think, like 420 million people, or we're going to power up 600 million people that have no electricity, or perhaps for 546 million people that are considered poor today, we need to think at scale. And the reason why we're mobilizing, for example, in working with the diaspora, your entire ambassadors in New York, we think they should really serve the peoples, and one of the easiest things they can help us is mobilize the diaspora. If that works out, perhaps we should mobilize their colleagues also in Geneva and reach out to the diaspora in Europe, because really they are our countries out there, and they represent Africa. So they should. That's something I think that they can easily do with us. So I'm guessing that is something that we are looking at. And finally, something I didn't mention is we are under the Alliance of Entrepreneurial Universities and the Project Origin. We are also trying to link the young people. You know, there's no reason why students in, for example, Addis Ababa University cannot work with their colleagues in Tokyo, or their colleagues in Stanford, or their colleagues in Cambridge, or their colleagues somewhere in France. So in a way, that's something we are still trying to figuring out on how it can work. If you really know how that can easily be done, again, we are really open to get all of you on board. We have very few hands, and any hands that can come, I will definitely be grateful to work with you. So on that note, thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Konde. Dr. Pili?
Here you raise an important question, and I think this is the question we should be asking ourselves every time we have a conversation like this. How do we work together to optimize and leverage each other's strength and address the weaknesses and bottlenecks that are there to drive towards the results that we seek? And I think it's a relevant question. And I would like to really thank my fellow panelists for really hitting it on the head, that we need to work better together. We are certainly not there. We need to work better together so that we can build the level of scale that we look for. Look, if 100 young people join the labor market today, only 1/3 of them find jobs in the formal sector. Only 1/3. The rest are either employed in the informal sector, really making ends meet and really in poverty, or unemployed. And therefore, for us, we should do better than to skill them for employment. We should make the effort and scale the effort in investing in entrepreneurship. And so the bank is very clear that in doing this, the African Union has the organs already in place and has the strategies and the Agenda 2063 and the action plan. Let's work within that framework. And so when you look at the bank's strategies, Jobs for Youth in Africa strategy, the Skills for Employability and Productivity in Africa action plan, of course the strategy for quality health infrastructure, they are strongly aligned with the African Union Agenda 2063 and the various action plans therein. So that should really be the leadership at the continent level. I know that with the forum that I was talking about, we work with the Commissioner for Education, Science, Technology and Innovation of the African Union, who is a strong partner in this respect. And we invite, of course, everybody to the forum, and we will continue doing that. But at the level of the country, as I indicated, we need to make sure that the countries take the lead. The countries have to own and lead in addressing this issue of investing in young people, investing in science, technology, and innovation, and making sure that those results are monitored, they have a database, and so on and so forth. And then mobilizing everybody at country level to finance the strategic plan, but also making sure that they do take evidence-based policy reforms that can attract private sector participation. Certainly the fiscal balance sheet is not enough to address this challenge. So we need to have the countries come to the table and make sure that they have these strategies to make sure that we are addressing the challenges head on. The few dollars that the countries can spare in this space really should go towards de-risking private sector participation, but really enormously investing in the entire education value chain, particularly science, technology, innovation, and mathematics as well. So we are happy that we are talking the same language with partners here, and I think we are positioning ourselves for greater collaboration going forward. And thank you, Chairperson.
Thank you very much, the three panelists. Just for information, within the DSI, we all have an indicator indicator that we have to respond to. That speaks to leveraging international resources, whether these are financial or technical. So it's imperative that through these conversations that we have, we also look at how as a continent we leverage these resources. So my plea is, as a manager, as a policy worker, as a private sector employee from where you are, how can we work together to leverage these resources? So it's a challenge that we need to work on, but tapping into the opportunities that have been referred to by the AFDB, UNECA, and IOM. And I am sure this is not the last we hear and speak to you, Dr. Phiri, Ms. Lily. You will definitely hear from us, and I'm not even mentioning Dr. Konde because we are partners for life in UNECA. So let me take this opportunity to thank you all for joining us for this session. Let's give them a round of applause, please. As you take the floor, Madam Sanya, I would like to change things a little bit. Oh, sorry, I promised 2 questions from the floor, and I saw Mr. Timen's hand is up. Apologies, and Dr. Chimora is up.
Yes, no, thank you, ma'am. And really, my apologies for taking the floor here. I must confess that I've been in the field of diplomacy for quite some time now. I won't mention the number of years. And in my experience in diplomacy, we've seen research being diverted or based on Western experiences. And it's a big, big concern. I just want to mention this because these are some of these I wouldn't like that they start surfacing at the end of the processes in Togo. So I really would want to propose that the point that was made by the Minister of Higher Education yesterday be taken very, very seriously, that we need to start looking at the continent and the diaspora for research. Because what's currently the trend is the brainwave and the thinking and the African excellence that we are calling for is in actual fact the reproduction of the thinking of the continent taken to the Western world and reproduced and packaged and coming back to the continent at a huge cost. So any issues that are likely going to divert from that, I think they'll be diverting from the whole notion of Pan-Africanism. That's the first point I wanted to make. And Professor Anyage made a point here that perhaps the concept and the notion of Ubuntu needs to inform the exchange between that which is in the diaspora by our own brothers and sisters and that which is in the continent in terms of sharing whatever the legal that we have, because we are brothers and sisters. The second point I want to make again is maybe here through you, Chair, maybe at some stage we will have to face another elephant in the room, as it is called. Maybe I don't want to go so far to call it an elephant. But the context here is, it does appear to me that there is a shift that has to be there in terms of how do we define the diaspora. And I really wanted to put somebody on the spot here in one of the excellencies, our colleague from Mexico. I think she's still in the room, I hope. Mexico is, yes. I really wanted, through you, Chair, and with your indulgence, to ask our colleagues from Mexico to share with us their experiences, especially with the Mexican diaspora in the US. You know, there are some lessons that we would like to learn, whether it's in this platform or at another stage, where the diaspora in Mexico is experiencing a lot of challenges just because of one political decision that is made at one point or another around the issue of the cross-border migration of Mexicans into one particular country. Because that aspect for me is critical, especially in relation to the remittances. the kind of exchange and the benefits that I think my sister from the African Development Bank was raising in terms of remittances. I think it's an important aspect that we need to also look at so that we don't reinvent the wheel. And then lastly, because we are talking about research, my sense is the expertise that comes from researchers is based on what is largely professional and also advanced kind of education that is benefited from researchers. So what does that mean for the diaspora that is not at that level? I mean, for instance, if you look at the trend and the years that have been looked at in terms of the whole debate this morning, starting from Marcus Garvey and right up to now, there's what is called voluntary migration, well, which is basically diaspora. I would like to hear our colleague from the IOM as to how do you view that there are those who are capable of voluntarily leaving the continent because they can benefit by working abroad. What does that mean in literal terms in relation to those that were involuntarily taken as slaves? Because those are two different notions of the diaspora conversation. So I just wanted to hear your understanding and your research in this area, because we need to look at these issues simultaneously. That's my little contribution here. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Ndimeni. So we will give the floor to the colleague from Mexico to respond. I will also attempt to respond a little bit on what we call internationalization of research, but Victor can also come in there. And we will also ask Madam Sanya and Madam Piri to speak on their understanding of the diaspora as well. Thank you. Over to you, ma'am.
Thank you very much. Yes, in fact, the diaspora, the Mexican diaspora, especially in the United States, as you may know, is very big. Only Mexicans who were born in Mexico, in the U.S., living in the U.S. is more than 12 million. We have 53 consulates from Mexican consulates in the United States. So of course the Mexicans in the United States is a very important issue for us. Of course we have many programs dealing with remittances. There's a lot of cultural projects and programs assuring that Mexicans in the U.S. keep the Mexican identity. So there are so many different points about the Mexican community in the U.S. I don't have with me like the numbers of remittances and so on, but I do think that the Mexican state and Mexican government does have a lot of information, and I will be glad to share any specific information further on with anyone that may find it useful. So thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you very much for that. So maybe just to touch on a little bit regarding internationalization of research, which is a concept that is stipulated in our decadal plan in response to our STI white paper adopted in 2019. So for us in South Africa, we really see the benefits of exposing our researchers and students to research work that's done outside South Africa, whether it be in Zimbabwe, in Morocco, or in the US. So that as they apply the research, or as they conduct their research, they have a global view and apply principles in partnership with others outside South Africa. This helps not to really invent the wheel one, but to also be relevant for a global context. So we have a number of programs that talk to internationalization of research. At the practical level, this includes funding researchers and students to work outside of South Africa. So to spend 6 months in Makerere University and have lecturers and students from those universities also come to South Africa through what we call a university training program. We also have programs that encourage joint research partnerships, where countries at the bilateral level jointly fund research and publish together. And it's important that we tap into the diaspora. They understand the African context, or they also understand the context in which they work. So we need to partner with those outside so that we can embed the principles of internationalization in our research. It's also important, though, that we don't end at publications of research, but we look at how, where applicable, we commercialize research results into products and services that can benefit South Africa's economy. And we call upon partners that are here that are interested in those aspects: mobility, joint research, joint funding of research, shared research infrastructure, but also going all the way to bridge the gap between science and economic diplomacy. That's in attempting to respond to your question, Mr. Tim. Back to you then, Dr. Sanya, the definition of the diaspora according to the IOM.
I'll come in to respond to the reflections from 3 points. When we had this discourse of the diaspora, to a very long time, the focus was on looking at south to north migration, or south to north mobility, where the notion was that people moved only from the continent to the north. And I think what our colleague from DERCO is bringing in is the second point, where in the work that we've done, we realized that there is also south to south migration and movement also within the continent. And so some of the work that we've done, and I think now this links to the conversation at the African Union, when you're talking about the African continental free trade, in terms of how that can be leveraged on for us to work, move goods. It's not only goods, but also move services, skills, and knowledge within the continent. And we, of course, then would need to reflect on the drivers of migration, what makes people move. There are people who are forced to move, and that is involuntary movement, but then there are people who make a choice to move for opportunities for work, but then they still have connections either with their countries or with the continent. And I think the reflection has also been from the point that as a continent, we need to see how we can leverage on the intellectual capacity of our diaspora. In the past, the focus was more on brain drain, and countries have been afraid that when you have people moving from your countries, you're losing that intellectual capacity. But then now we are reflecting more in terms of how we can talk about brain circulation, where you are able to either move or use the intellectual capacity to develop either your country or countries within Africa. I mean, if I just want to be provocative, I would dare say that this is something that we are far from getting there. Within the African Union, we've been talking about how we can use the free trade as an opportunity to grow the continent, and I think it's something we need to continue reflecting on how we can do it in a practical way.
Thank Thank you very much. I hope you are answered, Mr. Njimeni. Dr. Mkeka?
Thank you, moderator, Mampe Chaba. I think I am excited with the three presenters and have learned a new imperative. Yesterday, where I was at the International Science Council, there was the knowledge imperative, and today we're looking at the economic imperative, which is encapsulated by Dr. Martha Pili from the bank as being in science, technology, and innovation. If we look, and I'm speaking on behalf of my government, and I think this could be true in several other member states who may be present here. In our national development blueprints, for example, in the case of Malawi, the Malawi 2063, which is aligned to the agenda, EU Agenda 2063, and the quick win of 2030, the first medium-term implementation plan 1. We have a very clear outcome. Say by 2030, we would like to, have the requisite human capacity in science, technology, and innovation to be developed under science, technology, and innovation. And one of the key strategies is to pool, the diaspora for coordinated engagement. And a priority intervention, which the bank, but also United Nations Economic Commission for Africa have mentioned, including the IOM, is issues of establishing a network or networks of networks. In this case, we're targeting the Malawian scientists. And therefore, you see that all of us, we have the same language, the same vocabulary. Perhaps what has not happened now is the collusion of the efforts and to exploit the best. When she presented the data about the remittances generated, I was asking the reference you have used, Madam, and I scanned the networks and I discovered there are so many sources of these kind of remittances over time. And some do highlight both the remittances received or given, and there are matrices to that effect. We would want to know the reference which you are using, which you consider to be an authority, and later on to further disaggregate the data so that we know who are these who are sending remittance. Are they vendors? Are those in the informal employment like Dr. Victor Conte has highlighted, or the informal established institutions? So I think around that is where now we can do appropriate mapping to see who, for example, in our case, are in the field of science, technology, and innovation, because this is where now we will be aligning to what we want to achieve, the real sector, the real economy of productiveness, products and services, using the so-called knowledge-based, innovation-led, and tech-driven, economic growth and development. So maybe you could give us the reference from the migration, so which I want to digest further. But from the African Development Bank, Dr. Martha Pili, I would like to assure you that we have taken the multilateral or trilateral approach of tapping your resources from the African Development Bank on climate smart education and related aspects to build capacity in what you consider to be an economic imperative, for example. And I think we'll be looking forward to hear from you in terms of the nexus of the efforts that we're doing. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Prof. Dr. Piri, I think that question was for the AFDB. Would you like to respond to that, please?
No, Prof. I think, Chair, through you, this is music to my eyes on behalf, music to my ears, rather, on behalf of the bank. And congratulations, Prof, for really coming up with results targets on what you want to achieve as a government in the area of STI, and then making sure that it's part of the medium-term to long-term national development plan. So this is a conversation that we can have beyond this, Prof, to see how we can work together with you in partnership with ourselves at the bank and others at country level. So looking forward to that engagement after this. Thank you, Chair.
Super. Thank you so much. Let's give our panelists a round of applause, please. All right, I'd like to make the following proposals, please, because we are running out of time. The next session, which is supposed to focus on vaccines manufacturing, will continue. But because we also want to draw the elements of how investments in science, technology, and innovation can result in economic benefits. We'd like to combine that session with the AFCFTA session so that we have that conversation together. So with that proposal, I'd therefore like to invite speakers from both sessions to come to the stage, please. Dr. Piani Libea, Managing Director of Toka Bio, Mr. Rui Livramento, the Trade Attaché and Senior Trade Negotiator to the AFCFTA, Embassy of the Republic of Angola in Accra, Ghana, Associate Professor Chumora Bikeka from the DSTI in Malawi. We have lost two speakers, Ms. Akona Changela and Mr. Stavros Nicolaou. So we will combine those two sessions and speak to the link between STI and economic diplomacy. Can we give them a round of applause, please, as they come to the stage? I am missing Mr. Rui Livramento. I see he is coming. Sorry, I caught you off guard, sir. But thanks for your indulgence. All right. So, colleagues, we all know what happened between 2020 and 2022 with the COVID pandemic. We know that the world expected Africa to die literally because of the lack of infrastructure, research infrastructure in particular, because of the lack of capacity to develop and produce our own vaccines, but also because the lack of scientific capacity in the continent. But we didn't, we are still here, despite all of that. But there are huge lessons that the continent has learned since, and one is that we have to be prepared for pandemics such as COVID. So a lot has been done through the AU, CDC, through WHO, AFRO, through the leadership of our presidents in the continent to establish vaccines manufacturing hub in 5 regions across the continent. But we are far from being ready to face the pandemic. So the panel today will discuss what more needs to be done from a scientific background, from scientific basis, for us to be ready to address this pandemic. But two, how do we then leverage on the STI investments that the continent has made to take advantage of the opportunities offered by the AFCFTA? How can we benefit from the AFCFTA in terms of trading in science, tech, and innovation goods, and ensuring movement of researchers, of innovators, of students? How do we get that right? So the panel here will help unpack all of that, and I'll give them each 3 minutes as opening remarks, and then I will pose questions, and then we'll ask the floor to also pose questions and then draw to a conclusion. If any of our panelists that have dropped off join at some point, colleagues will let me know. Mr. Stavros Nicolaou from Aspen and Ms. Akona Changela, if they do join in, please let me know, but we will go ahead as proposed for the time being. So first up is Dr. Piani Libea, who has his own private company, a biotech company called Toka Bio. Can you just tell us a little bit, Doc, about what work you've done in the continent, and to also respond to the question of how do we become ready, pandemic ready, going forward? Thanks.
Thank you. I was hoping this is on, otherwise my biotech knowledge fails me on how exactly it works. I'm from Toka Bio, which is a biotech company with heavy slant on animal health. We do maybe about 20% of our work on human health, and this was mostly forced during COVID time because animal health just took the back burner. And we do work mostly in developing diagnostics for both animal health, but also for zoonotic diseases. And lately as well, we are involved in vaccine design with a specific mandate to try and resolve those diseases that we know. While there may be diagnostics and vaccines elsewhere through the multinationals, but there are those viruses that are stubbornly within our continent and are not necessarily responsive to the vaccines that may be available on over-the-counter table. And it's with that kind of a mandate that as a company we try and look at that. Currently, most of our programs are within the Southern African region, but also the East African region, although we are slowly trying to look at the Central Africa. And one of the issues, obviously, for us working with animals is you have to fully understand the cultural norms, the language, the discussions as well, because as you would know, most of the livestock is in the rural areas, and what you do in the lab might not necessarily be what is required when you have to now deal with what you experience in the field directly. I'll stop there for now.
Thank you, moderator. I'm Chomora Mikeka, the Director of Science, Technology and Innovation in Ministry of Education, Malawi government. Aside from that, I'm an associate professor of physics, and but I'm trained as an engineer, electrical engineering. I will speak from the perspectives of some of the positions that I've held in the African continent, which I still hold. First, and I think more critical to this session is the African Organization for Standardization, which I immediately, joined during the pandemic. When we realized that the capacity of the African continent to contain the pandemic vis-a-vis or compared to the projections and statistics which were demonstrated in terms of the survival capacity for the continent, if the pandemic would move with the wrath in which it has taken off, would be growing our population negatively. I think by now would be negative, populations, means that all of us would have been dead and degenerated, exactly like Mpegi had, alluded to. And that we managed to, we mobilized and created a very brand new technical committee on physical, medical devices and equipment and few other aspects, after realizing that the manufacturing capacity of Africa to produce basic things like gloves, syringes, drug administration, tools and instruments, and then the other aspects which were used actually during COVID was below or just about 2%. In other words, we had not 98% capacity to do the same. Our universities had predominantly, been theoretical, celebrating graduating graduates who could only celebrate knowledge, but no skill, competence, or capacity, except for few universities of science and technologies on the continent, which I think somehow they have been supported by wonderful people like Victor Konde, UNECA, and others like Mbalala University of Science and Technology in Uganda, and several others who were able to begin to, manufacture aspects like, magnetic resonance imaging machines, MRI, where based on our standards we'll be able to push in through people. So such African Standards Organization, in there we defined a mark, for example, the eco mark, the standards through the harmonization process, the ASHA model that we are working on, which would support the African Free Continental Trade Area Agreement, FCTA, At that point, we had realized over 40 member states had signed and party to that. And it was required that within Africa and within the Free Continental Trade Area Agreement, we should be able to see several other aspects, in this case medical devices, being sold across reliance systems and related aspects happening. All this which I've just given as a preamble is captured in a book which we call Existential Priorities of the African Free Continental Trade Area. Existential Priorities of the African Free Continental Trade Area, which is hosted on the platform and domain of the United Nations Economic Commission for Africa. So, for example, if you just search Mikeka, UNECA, you will find that book comes up. And in chapter 10, I have detailed what I know and love to do the most. So I've defined in there Digital Africa. What is it that governments in Africa, having experienced the pandemic and looking forward with science, technology, and innovation in mind, should be able to consider to do? So everything else is unpacked in chapter 10, Digital Africa, submitted to member states for exploitation. All sectors have been covered in there. And my key critical argument has been, for example, that if governments decide to inject or perpetually, continuously, traditionally and conventionally pump in, investments or injections of financial to sectors without any other modern innovative way, we can only grow the economy not beyond 37% or develop the economy. But if we think and rethink and move into the economic imperative, which doesn't look at economics as it is, but now use science, technology, and innovation, which all the other countries have done, exploit the huge resource, plant, animal biodiversity, minerals, and everything that we have within Africa, we should be able to grow our economies closer to and in excess of 67%. This we have seen from careful study of all the grown economies, and therefore science, technology, and innovation becomes a critical focus area, a catalyst, a driver, within human capital development, which we consider several sectors like education, health, and several others, water, and these are the so-called multiplier effects. Sectors with a multiplier effect, and if we invest in these few, with human capital development, invest in this and use science technology as a driver, we should be able to do a lot more things. In summary, issues of drug discovery, vaccine discovery. We are happy to see South Africa's course. We are happy to see Botswana. We are happy to see Senegal. I was at the Grand Challenges Global, where Bill Gates and others were at in Dakar, Senegal, 2 months ago or a month ago. Here you could see huge commitments, realizing the potential of Africa. And these manufacturing centers of excellence, centers of specialization, should not be diasporized, should not be outside the African continent. Because most of these, in fact, whatever is happening out there, the ones who are developing those ones are Africans. They are Africans or people of the African origin. What if we did like China did? The time China decided to bring its people back to China, I was in Japan. I had stayed in Japan over 6 years. At that time, Chinese government realized that in Silicon Valley, the huge resource of whatsoever was coming out there was made by Chinese scientists and engineers. So it offered them deliberately, come to China, we will give you land to establish, it will facilitate registration of businesses, we will facilitate all the processes to do whatsoever. That's why I was asking Ashley, what can you do? If she, for example, has mechanisms and tells the government to say, for us to do cosmetics of this sort, lotions, skin care, for example, for those people with albinism, we just need this machine, we need this process, ABCD, and that if this provided, we find that now we begin to produce within the import-export imbalance which is there and affecting most of the African countries can begin to be reversed, so that we begin to produce satisfactory, but also begin to export, either within the African region or the southern SADC region or the African continent, and that is within the value chain exploitation that we're talking about under the themes. I then wanted to say, to stop there, moderator, just to highlight that more of the content is in Chapter 10, Digital Africa, of the existential priorities of the African Free Continental Trade Area. Thank you.
Can I go ahead? Program Director. Thank you very much. Good afternoon. My name is Rui Livramento. I am the Chief Trade Negotiator of Angola at the AFCFTA. I'm based in Accra, Ghana, where the Secretariat is based. It's true, Program Director, you've caught me off guard because my presentation was completely on a different topic, but I can still manage to hint a few ideas. When we talk about the pandemic and the challenge that the African continent has faced during those years, you talk about intellectual property rights and of course the trade-related intellectual property rights agreement waiver by the WTO, which was not respected by our developed partners, I must call it that, and that resulted, of course, in huge difficulties in the continent in terms of manufacturing necessary medicines for our populations, but at the same time created a huge opportunity for us to try to see ways to become independent of global dictators, especially in terms of what regards our own safety in terms of health, but also in terms of food security. So with that in mind, you can see a great evolution of the agreement of the AFCFTA happening during those times that we were all closed up. It's when you can see that even phase one protocols, such as trading goods and trading services, were somehow surpassed by phase two protocols, which is investment, IP, and competition. The IPR protocol itself was just finished this year and allows for a legal framework into the continent that will lead into a concentration on traditional knowledge, indigenous knowledge, that will allow manufacturers in the continent to start bringing their own patents into our own products, and thus also in a sense promoting the made in Africa goods. But one of the biggest difficulties that you have, the biggest challenges that you have in Africa, is the market access for our own goods, our own produced goods in the continent. That is being treated at the level of the trading goods protocol, but you have a huge barrier on that, which is rules of origin. And currently, the process of negotiations on rules of origin in trading goods, it's causing a bit of a setback in terms of progressing and achieving total market access for African goods. But you can also talk as well on rules of origin in trading services, especially in investments, because rules of origin are made to avoid trade diversion. Sometimes we think about the diversion in terms of manufactured goods but there's also a diversion of investments being made through countries that belong to the AFCFTA, and that's a new challenge that we are now facing. And let's say that by 2024 we should be able to start gaining a bit of a track in terms of achieving developments. Then because as I said, my presentation was based on how the diaspora impacts the implementation of the AFCFTA. And then you look at the Chinese and Indian diaspora's impact in their own economies, and you notice that the amount of the remittances that were put into transformed into investments in SEZs led to a huge development of their economies, and perhaps that should be a way of us also looking at how to better channel the remittances, and of course concentrating programs such as the manufacturing of goods, but of medicines which are critical to our own safety. And another aspect is the development of the cosmetics fabrication in the continent, which has a lot of potential, not only inside the continent, but also linking into the diaspora's demand for African products.
Thank you very much, gentlemen, for allowing me to shift the floor a little bit. I'm going to do a little bit more of that with your permission, just to ask some off-the-cuff questions. So, Dr. Oliveira, you are a biotechnopreneur with a footprint in South and Eastern parts of Africa. And I have two questions for you. Have you benefited from the AFCFTA? And if not, what are some of the barriers that you think Mr. Livramento here can help address for biotechnopreneurs such as yourself? As you think about that, let me ask you a question, Prof. Mikeka. I did Google your book. I found it there. And in the book, just the forward, quickly scanning through the forward, it speaks about trade liberalization. It speaks about innovation. It speaks about fair competition. In the Malawi Agenda 2063 strategic document, how have you taken this into account? How can the AFCFTA support trade, especially trading in STI goods for Malawi? At the practical level, do you see signs that could change? And if so, how? Or how can that happen? Before you answer, let me go to the AFCFTA. I'm sorry for taking away from your presentation, but you bring in a very important point, the last point that you made, regarding remittances that can be used as investment in specialized economic zones, especially for manufacturing in Africa. How has the AFCFTA started implementing this kind of a principle? I think it's a noble principle. I think the diaspora would like to invest in a way that they can benefit as well. Has that at the practical level started happening for the AFCFTA? Let me pause here for now. Over to you, Chairman.
Thanks, ma'am. I think I will use the example maybe in answering the question, where, as an example, our main focus, even as we work in South Africa, would be how do we assist most of the livestock farmers to export their commodities, Why export? Because it's during the export process that you can add a lot more value, commercial value, within your animals. The same set of animals, you can make a bit more money than you used to. Now, there are two aspects to livestock biotech programs that literally links back to pandemic preparedness, outbreak management and control, in that the skills that are attained within that are very much applicable into the human field. In short, how you design and you produce your vaccine for an animal is not very different from what you do for humans. It's just the safety aspects of it and maybe the absorption that you need to look at more than you would for animals. The beauty with animals is that they literally pay for themselves. If you do that and you are able to get them to export through the foreign income that you get, you're able to do that. So if I come back to the AFCFTA, we all know that while this will try to facilitate that we're able to trade with our partners with fewer restrictions, it is still almost impossible to move a chicken from Maputo to Pretoria, because the phytosanitary regulations that are required, and rightly so, will not allow for such trade to happen. And if there's one thing we do as Africans is we farm, whether it's vegetables, whether it's chickens, goats or cattle, everywhere we farm. A good example is just look at the GDP of each and every African country and look at what is the contribution of agriculture to that GDP. It is very high percentage. It could go even higher. What is required? It means we have to use the very biotechnology as a platform to onboard our people to use the same animals and commodities that they have to add value to it, so that we can feed those that are in the Middle East, Europe too, in terms of the animals that we have, especially if you look in the central area of our continent, because it rains a lot more often. You have a high density of animals and the carrying capacity is there. Now, what would I wish for from the AFCFTA is some of the programs that we do. I'll give you a simple example with Zambia, which we copy from the South African side. South Africa would have an ostrich farm, one of the biggest, that has been exporting to Europe and is unable to do so because of outbreaks. We work with that to try and say, how do we zone that and work it in a way that is allowable in the same regulations that are required. If you look at the trade deficit between South Africa and Zambia, it's over 90% favoring South Africa. Does that mean there's absolutely nothing we need from Zambia? That's not true. There is a lot of things we can get. How do we address the phytosanitary regulations? You can do that by policy, or you can really go down to the biotech itself to try and unblock some of the blockages that are there. But if you do it only for the sake of unblocking, it becomes problematic. If you look at it from the biotech and the trade, but also looking at how do we enable that trade that we so much want, it becomes a lot easier. And I think from our discussions with both the Zambians, the Ugandans, and even Ethiopians, it would be important that some of those engagements are actually co-opted in a way that is visible within the AFCFTA program, and one can start measuring what the outcomes and the unintended consequences might be when you look at what regulation and actually pushing a bit of the public sector to assist in that in different countries.
Thank you very much. Before we go to you, Prof. Nikeka, I just want to bring Mr. Mendo a little bit, because Dr. Libea was very specific in terms of how the AFCFTA can assist. Are there plans to already to help deal with the kinds of issues he's raised, the phytosanitary issues? Are you addressing them, as he has said, changing policies, or how will the FCFTA support biotech solutions to assist or increase trade in Africa? We'll come back to that SEZ question in a minute.
Yes, what has been mentioned, it's a matter of harmonization of standards and harmonization of the quality infrastructure that you have across the continent, and also of policies. That is why you have created a special committee, a technical committee on SPS and on technical barriers to trade as well. So those two should work hand in hand, trying to eliminate as much barriers to trade, those that we call non-tariff barriers, because you have the tariffs that are put in the schedules of tariff schedules that you tariff books that all countries have, and then you have those barriers that are created by institutions across the countries, and the transposition of biotech products, for instance, it's related to those non-tariff barriers, especially institutionalized by specific ministries that sometimes are even out of the trade negotiations. But then you have, that's why you have the SPS agreement to be harmonized or to be closed around the next 2 to 3 months, if I'm not mistaken, and that should also help out in that sense. And you also have the project of the creation of an African wide continental standard, Bureau of Standards, so as to try to help companies moving their goods and services as well.
Super, thank you so much. So I hope in the youth lifetime, remember earlier I said the youth slogan in South Africa is economic freedom in our life. A lot of them want to be farmers, to be in the biotech space, that through this continental Bureau of Standards or harmonization, these standards, we will soon see many Africans intertrade facilitated by the ICC, but it does work very well. So we're very delighted to hear that. Let us go back to Prof. Mikeka. The book that you co-authored spoke about IP, fair competition, innovation, digitization as some of the enablers for the AFCFTA. And my question to you was how Malawi through its Agenda 2060 is preparing for that. How are you enabling that to happen? As a science diplomat, as a physicist yourself, how do you see that happening?
Thank you so much, moderator. I will pick keywords from what you have picked from the preamble of the book. I'll pick innovation, I'll pick digitalization. I wanted to highlight that the African Free Continental Trade Agreement, for it to be operational and to be successful, it's important to ensure that its physical infrastructure, but also the digital infrastructure is properly shaped, which is happening, and it is operationalized. The physical infrastructure here, I'm giving an example of the road networks from Cairo to Cape, or from Cape to Cairo. That's at that time we used to talk of I think a city over there down to here, like the super highways. Similarly, in terms of the digital infrastructure, we are referring to the digital superhighways, the information infrastructure and network, which can facilitate trade at the digital level in the platforms. And therefore, that book, there is a term that is being used many times, the digital emerging technologies, and that one unpacks all the technologies that the young people are loving to do, from artificial intelligence, which is the machine learning, deep learning, and all those kind of aspects under the fourth industrial revolution, including the fifth industrial revolution. They're coming, as key things happening from the young person doesn't need now to go at the border and cross the border to do trade. And that's why the digital financial inclusion, as propelled by COMESA and several others, is coming through. So that book and the FCTA is properly situated under two critical and important continental and regional policies. Number one is the African Continent Digital Strategy for Africa, the Digital Strategy for Africa, DSA. In that one of the key words and goals or targets is to ensure that 98 or 99% of the Africa market becomes digital. So a digital market is a key word under that. You find that SADC also, the ministers of education, training, science, technology, innovation, ministers of information, communications, technology, ministers of energy, ministers of economic infrastructure, ministers of digitalization have approved this year. In Kinshasa, DRC, I was there when we have already considered the other sectors' approvals, and then our ministers of science, technology, and innovation have approved that there be a digital strategy, digital transformation strategy for the SADC region. In the digital transformation strategy for Africa, you find that there is huge depth of issues of the digital infrastructure, connectivity, and related aspects. Now, why am I bringing this? You'll find that when we do that, now coming to our national development blueprint, the Malawi 2063, which has 4 decades, and the first decade is MIP1, Malawi Implementation Plan 1, up to 2030, aligned to the Sustainable Development Goals 2030, but also other, specific, agenda by 2030, including the cooperation frameworks which we are signing with, teams, like for example, the UN team by 2028. In there, we have pillars and enablers. 3 pillars, 7 enablers. Enabler number 5 is human capital development. That's what STI is. Pillar, industrialization is in there. But there is an enabler, a catalyst, also called economic infrastructure. Under economic infrastructure, what we're looking at is transport innovation, and related. Transport is critical, energy is critical for trade. You need to have roads and the digital super information highways, but also need power. And then these are critical to drive the trade and facilitate the trade, including the FCTA. And within that, you notice that our country, to exploit and operationalize that enabler, is cooperating with many countries in terms of energy power pool from South Africa, make sure that we share the power and therefore drive that. 2 is issues of digital, special purpose vehicles across, so that at least we can share, a bandwidth from the sea to those countries which are, land locked, but now we're calling them land linked. Malawi is a land linked. It's linked to beautiful countries, including Angola and others, through other Zambia, and therefore we have opportunities. When we have these, for trade to occur, if it's a physical one, a truck that is taking goods from Cape Town and is going to Cairo, it should be tracked. So this is where now the digital imaging technology is coming. We're using the ECT, electronic cargo tracking. Where would it offload its goods, and then it shouldn't be empty. It should be able to pick another good, so you should be monitoring that on a dashboard. This is what FCTA is talking about. Then it's going to Sudan, it's going to Khartoum and other places. Khartoum and other places. We want to see that in a platform, in a network, and optimize the transportation. This is the work which we have done with the United Nations Economic Commission for Africa since 2017-18 with Dr. Victor Conde, and I was one of the consultants for transport innovation in Africa to ensure that. And when we did that, we enabled universities, for example, right now, some universities in South Africa, in Uganda, in Kenya, Namibia, yes, generating the cars which would be used for automobile industry, which would be critically important for the AFCTA. These are vehicles which will be with low or no carbon footprint, but also not over-utilizing what we are suffering from, the petroleum-related hydrocarbons, and then therefore we're talking of e-vehicles, electric vehicles. And the goods around this, some of our countries, for example, Malawi, has reduced or cut off, tariffs, in terms of the value-added tax, amended the tax regime for that, so that anything to do with electric vehicles, which can build and support the economic infrastructure to trade seamlessly, import things from South Africa. In fact, if you have, for example, charging stations for e-vehicles or parts we can use to assemble, that can happen easily and freely. And this has been loosed for Malawi to do that, because we have seen how we have struggled with importation of petroleum-related hydrocarbons, but also the repercussions of the same when we're using used vehicles from other countries, and a lot of fumes, particulate matter getting into the air, and therefore contrary to our own commitments in terms of making ourselves green, fresh, and everything else. So you'd see revolving under economic infrastructure and exploiting the digital platforms infrastructure based on the policies and strategies that we have at the national level, regional level, and continental level to support the African free continental trade areas. All this is under digital emerging technologies. I think to stop there to see this is just one aspect I could speak about, in 3 minutes. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much. So what I gathered from your interventions is infrastructure, not just road infrastructure, but digital infrastructure, but skills as well, to enable inter-Africa trade through supporting STI supporting economic development. At this stage, before I come to you, Mr. Labramento, I understand that Mr. Nicolau is connected online. He is the Senior Executive Strategic Trade Manager at ASFO. And I'd like him to come in here, please, to reflect. I'm not sure what your 3 minutes intervention is going to be about. You can start with that, but to also reflect on how you see the FCFTA supporting pharmaceutical companies like us. Are you connected, Mr. Nicolau? If he is not, we will go back to you. Okay, I think he's online. Mr. Stavros Nicolau, if you can hear and respond, you can make your 3 minutes intervention, but also reflecting on how your organization has benefited, is benefiting, and where you see further opportunities for your organization to benefit from the FCFTA. All right, maybe while we wait for him to catch his breath, we can go back to the issues of remittances as investments for SMEs, especially when it comes to manufacturing.
Thank you, Director. Just before I go into remittances, it should be a good point to mention what Professor has just mentioned. The AFCFTA is also very much engaged in trying to gather investments for investors for the implementation of the Program for Infrastructure Development in Africa, PREPA, which is essential because you have to one of the main objectives of the AFCFTA is also the creation of regional value chains, and in agro-processing, manufacturing of medicines, transports and logistics. And at the same time, I don't know if you've seen, the protocol on digital trade has just been concluded. It should be approved by the Council of Ministers tomorrow in Dar es Salaam. There's only a small aspect of the protocol which is related to the classification or distinction of what is an electronic or digital goods. But that's, yes, it's a huge advancement, although in my personal view, I think we, the Ministries of Industry and Trade, we are getting the document too political, it needs to be more technical, so it needs the contribution of experts in the field instead of us placing our own words into the implementation process at least. So if you've asked if AFCFTA has started implementing the transformation of remittances into investments, no. We have too much in our lap nowadays. We still have to finish up the rules of origin, the trade in goods. We've only finished the protocols on investment and competition, but that is something that we've been discussing among delegates, not among in the Council of Ministers or the Senior Trade Officials meetings. It's not something that has come up, but when you look at the discussions in terms of how are we going to make investments in flagship programs of the African Union, you can see that there's a drive thought of the private sector starting to place money into those projects instead of us waiting for banks that are owned by governments. So indirectly, governments are still putting money in flagship programs. Even the implementation of plans by the Secretariat are being put by donors mainly, and African governments and the private sector only account for 5% of that. So we need to scale up that, and so that's why the discussion on how you're going to diversify investments is been coming up. Thank you.
Super, thank you so much. So I think for the diaspora that are out there, this is one way of investing in Africa's development, but particularly to support inter-Africa trade, remittances for investments, as soon as the protocol is ready, of course. Let's take questions then from the floor. If you are senior official in your government and you have a burning specific question, you have a high-powered delegation here that can answer your question. There's a question in the center here, madam. No, it's all right. Don't worry. I was just teasing others.
Okay. Oh, goodness. Don't know if I can handle this.
Introduce yourself before asking your question.
My name is Tana Makoka. I run an organization called Umlando Wabantu. I have two questions. One for Dr. Libia and one for Mr. Libramentu.
And madam, if you can just speak up a little bit or come
Sorry.
closer to the mic.
Sorry, I was saying my name is Tana Makoka. I have two questions, one for Dr. Libia and one for Mr. Libramentu. We see in Africa a lot of zoonotic diseases, and because of climate change, this is just going to increase. I noted that your company, Toka Bio, works both on livestock and human health, and so I was just wondering how much work you've done on the One Health approach. So yeah, that was my one question. Then the other question was for Ms. Libramento. It's not specifically about ACFTA, and more about the WTO ministerial meeting coming up in Feb and WTO reform. I noted what you had said about not respecting TRIPS with regards to pharmaceutical products, and I was just wondering from your perspective, if you were at that meeting on WTO reform, what recommendations would you put on the table? Thanks so much.
Thank you. Let's start with you, Dr. Libia.
Thank you very much for that question, and it's very relevant, and it's something that we've been trying to deal with. Sometimes the weakness with especially some of us who started in the scientific field and move a bit further to entrepreneurship is that we sometimes cannot resist the urge to compete rather than collaborate. So you find that that idea of I'm the one who developed it, I'm the one who got it right, doesn't, sometimes it's very hard because you train long and hard to be like that. Now you find that in this kind of a field, it is important that, for instance, you look at Rift Valley fever outbreak that happened about a year or two ago. Both animals and humans died, same virus. Now you have to look at it and say, you can't go there and say, well, I only care about animals for trade, or I care about human life, forget the animals. It has to go together. But while I advocate that if one looks at the virus directly, it doesn't matter if you're worried about humans or animals, but there are specific aspects within each of those hosts that requires other people, and that's where that high wall of competition has to come down. You have to be able to call others that are just as experienced in the field that you might have a blind spot. And for that, what we have done is, for instance, earlier this year, we've been together with ACGT, another organization in South Africa, and they have a program with other stakeholders called COHISA, and they've been working on the One Health platform, and we joined on that to say where we find things that we see from the animal side could be, it's a zoonotic disease and could cause issues. Can we call you through so that we work together to try and get the solution the only way we think we can? So it's very critical, and as I said earlier, it is the learnings that we get both from humans, and I'll give you an example. It's easier for me to tell people in one rural village, these cows shouldn't cross 5 kilometers this way. It happens. But you stand at a border post and you say, it's COVID time, you are positive for COVID, go home. They finish, stamp their passport, they've crossed the border, they don't have transport money to go back home. What do? They cross over, they go back to the same transport that they were in with 19 other people that are not infected. No wonder we have a wave. So it is those things that we have to learn from each other, but it's the only way that we can approach this to try and at least see some breakthrough.
Thank you very much. Are there more questions from the floor? While we also check if Mr. Stavros is connected and he is able to make his input. Mr. Lavros? Maybe the panel has got questions for each other.
Hello, good afternoon. I hope I'm audible.
Yes, thanks. Please go ahead, loud and clear.
And I apologize that I had to leave the venue and then come back. I had a delegation that was waiting to meet me here in Johannesburg. Can I just check, Program Director, how long do I have? I don't want to be verbose and put you in a worse situation with the time. So
10 minutes.
How long do I have?
10 minutes.
10 minutes. Okay, wonderful. Okay, so let me again greet all the esteemed colleagues from Southern Africa and beyond the borders of Southern Africa. It's a great pleasure for me to make a few remarks. The subject matter is a very important one for the continent, and a good prefacing statement on my part would be, as I introduce myself, is that during COVID, we all know, it's well rehearsed, well recorded now, that Africa found itself at the back end of the queue, not only from a vaccine perspective, but even PPEs and other medical countermeasures. The world said they would act in solidarity in January and February 2020 at the onset of the pandemic. And of course, we know the truth and the reality is very different. And it became each country for itself. Solidarity flew out the window, and unnecessary lives and livelihoods were lost on the African continent because we could not inter alia source vaccines. Now, there were promises from India that India would keep its supply lines open to Africa. That didn't happen. Even basic APIs for some of the symptomatic relief, things like paracetamol, the lines were closed, the channels blocked. Similar situation from certain European countries. So all in all, some very hard lessons learned during COVID. The most manifest lesson was that during a time of a public health crisis and or emergency, you're on your own. You've got to control your own destiny. You can only do that if you have your own capacities and capabilities. And I think the silver lining here in what happened is that Africa, the African Union in particular, have resolved that never again shall the COVID debacle be repeated, and that Africa has to set itself on a pathway of establishing its own vaccine capacities and capabilities. This was all expressed in an African Union Bureau communique of 17 May 2022. It's a seminal communique because that really sets Africa on a different pathway in terms of becoming less dependent on other jurisdictions, other traditional jurisdictions. As a target, that communique sets a target from the present 99% of vaccines that Africa imports. It sets a target of reducing that 99% down to 40% by 40% or lower by 2040. Now, we should also remember that this conversation should not only be confined to vaccines, but other biologics, diagnostics, testing devices, medical devices, and of course, other pharmaceuticals in the form of therapeutics. The question is, how do we get there? And this is a good time to introduce who I'm representing on this call. So as you would have heard, my name is Stavros Nicolau. I represent an organization called Aspen Pharmacare. Aspen is Africa's largest pharmaceutical manufacturer. We were the only company and the first to produce COVID-19 vaccines, albeit under contract manufacture. So we're the first in the Southern Hemisphere and the first on the African continent. But we need to talk about the future and how we get there. There are 3 steps in my view, and all 3 of these steps require significant political will. And these steps are as follows. The first is that it is no use putting up manufacturing capacity on the African continent if A, there is no demand, and B, the international and or multilateral procurement agencies are not procuring vaccines from African producers, then these facilities will never be sustained. Now, Africa in the broader context is a small market, and we cannot afford to have dilution of our own volumes. If I were to cite this differently, regrettably, Africa has outsourced its volumes largely to Asia and some parts of Europe, and that is why we're not in control of our own destiny. So we need to reclaim the volumes that Africa is consuming and use those to build economies of scale on our own continent. So the first point is that there has to be a reform of the international procurement mechanisms. Most colleagues on this call, some of you at least, will recognize that around 80% of Africa's vaccine requirements are procured via Gavi. Gavi is the Global Alliance for Vaccines. The procurement vehicle is through UNICEF, but between Gavi and UNICEF they cover 80% of the continent's vaccine requirements. These are primarily pediatric vaccines, and the continent consumes about 1.3 billion doses of vaccines as we speak. So the procurement has not favored any African country and or company at this point in time, and we've been agitating, and many of the governments that are involved on this call, our very own President Ramaphosa, both in his AU chair capacity 2020 and more recently in 2021 as AU COVID champion, and now in his role, which I understand he will be appointed, which is AU pandemic preparedness champion. In all of those roles, I think he led the charge for a reform of the Gavi, UNICEF, and other international agencies' procurement mechanisms. And I'm pleased to report back that germane to any pandemic preparedness is having your own capacity and capability, which is sustainable and is predictable. And I'm pleased to report back that the Gavi board will be meeting on this topic on the 7th, which is on Thursday this week, the 7th of December. And it is widely accepted that there will be some reform of the procurement mechanism. And from what I understand, of course, this is not past the post. We will have to wait for Friday the 8th for confirmation of this. But certainly the signals are positive that Gavi will put aside $1 billion to support local manufacture and in particular local and regional procurement on the African continent over the next 10 years. This is quite a significant departure from what we previously experienced, and aims, whilst keeping a competitive market, it aims to provide through a premium some incentive to regional African manufacturers to start producing for the continent, from the continent. So the Gavi mechanism that gets discussed on Thursday is likely to be the first breakthrough that we've been expecting as Africa, and that's certainly encouraging. There's a lot more work to be done, of course, but it's certainly an encouraging development. Now that's one of three points in the continuum that I wanted to raise. Let me raise the second one, which is, of course, the continent has been speaking about a pooled procurement mechanism. This is in line with both the Africa CDC, who I think have done Herculean work in the last 6 months, led by the Director General, Dr. Jane Kaseya. So Africa CDC on the one hand, and then the Africa Continental Free Trade Area led by Wamkele Mene. So both the DG and the SG have been doing a lot of work around this. And the idea is that we look to aggregate our volumes as a continent, and that we use those aggregated volumes to promote and enhance regional manufacture on the continent, use aggregated volumes again for an internal procurement mechanism and economies of scale. And above all, this would provide the political will that's required from each of the countries, because even though you might be the most competitive manufacturer on the continent for a Gavi UNICEF procurement, you would still need the buy-in of each of the African Gavi countries. So getting the pooled procurement mechanism done and dusted, and I understand it will serve at the AU Heads of State meeting in February. Getting the PPM, as we call it, pooled procurement mechanism, is an exceedingly important development, both in terms of ensuring demand, predictability in demand, and also providing sustainability to manufacturers so that you can sustain these capex investments on the continent. And above all, the most important thing here is, by owning your own capacity, you will then have security of supply and independence of imports, which were unreliable during COVID, and above all, health security. I mean, that's the most important end objective here, is how do we attain and acquire in our lifetime health security for our very own continent, Africa. Now let me end off the third and final of the 3 points in the continuum. That is, all these products, of course, whether it's vaccines or other medical countermeasures, all of them do require what we call World Health Organization, WHO, pre-qualification. This is a regulatory standard that is applied, and provided the manufacturer passes pre-qualification, then that product or that set of products, that range of products become eligible for procurement by Gavi and other governments on the continent. The PQ process in WHO has served Africa and other parts of the world well, but in terms of the manufacturing project on the continent, it regrettably does delay African manufacturers and hands an advantage to Asian and European manufacturers. So the third leg here is the continent, and Africa CDC again has taken the lead on this, is we are also calling for either additional resources to be placed at WHO PQ for an acceleration of approvals for African producers, and or alternatively that there is reform of the PQ process so that African producers are not disadvantaged because their PQ process is delayed vis-a-vis Asian manufacturers in particular. So these are the three areas, colleagues, that will change the world for African manufacturing, will accelerate the ambition of Africa becoming self-dependent for vaccines, and obviously the next step has to be other medical countermeasures. We shouldn't talk about the next pandemic. We are already in the next pandemic. It's called non-communicable diseases, and it includes things like diabetes, cancer, cardiovascular diseases, lung diseases, and others. And diabetes, of all of those I've mentioned, is probably the most sinister and has the widest reaching medium to long-term implications from a burden of disease on the continent. So we need to use the same leverage, the same strategy to get on top of non-communicable diseases and diabetes in particular, and building local and regional capacities and expertise and capabilities is important to get on top of NCDs as well. So my concluding comment, colleagues, I've tried to give you a sense today of the importance of having your own local or regional manufacturing on the continent, so that we never ever again are in a position where unnecessary lives and livelihoods were lost. Many economies on our continent have not yet recovered from COVID, and had we had our own countermeasures, recovery would have been that much easier. So I've tried to demonstrate why it's important. Secondly, why it's important to follow through with the political will, and we need to keep agitating for health equality in our lifetime. We need to keep agitating for health security for our continent. The world can never enjoy global peace and security unless there is also health security on the African continent. And lastly, I've given encouraging feedback with respect to Gavi, but we need to follow through as a community and a fraternity on the continent. We need to follow through on the pooled procurement mechanism and also the WHO pre-qualification. It's been a great pleasure speaking to you, and I'm available if there are any questions. And thanks very much to the organizers for this opportunity, and hopefully I've added some value to the conversation around the importance of pandemic preparedness. Thanks very much.
Thank you very much, Dr. Nicola. A round of applause for you, please. So before we take the last round of questions, there was a question on WTO and TRIPS for you, Mr. Livramento. Let us note that and take two more questions, and then we'll conclude this session. Are there any further questions from the floor? All right, you too.
Sorry, hi, it's Lorado. I think he was wanting to answer Tana's initial question, Mr. Livramento. She asked you a question earlier. I don't know if you got a chance to answer her.
Sorry, can I also add one more question to Mr. Nicola, because that came afterwards. I would have done all the questions together.
He's not there.
Is Mr. Nicola still there?
Yeah.
Mr. Nicola, I'm aware that you're also involved with the BRICS working group on pandemic preparedness. And I was just wondering if you could share with us how BRICS supports Africa developing its manufacturing capacity? Thanks.
How does BRICS support its vaccines manufacturing capacity? So let's take those two questions and then we'll close the session. I think both questions are for you. Sorry, one for Mr. Ibrahim, let's start with Akina, and then the second one for Mr. Nicola.
Thank you.
Yeah, would you like me to come in first on the BRICS one, right?
Yeah, you can come in first, Mr. Nicola.
Yeah. Great, thanks very much, and thanks for the question. The benefits of BRICS in the pandemic preparedness context is one where we can look to identify where the synergies lie between the different members of BRICS, and of course the initial discussion was around 5 BRICS members. Now it will be around 10, because we know Argentina is looking to withdraw, so it won't be 11, it will be 10 member countries. The synergies lie primarily in technology development, technology and know-how transfers. That's primarily where we are looking to place the focus. And we know, of course, that Africa does not at this point in time have significant or material R&D capability. We do not have material technology development capability. So we are reliant on partnerships, and those partnerships we look to both the East and the West to see where we can either license or acquire technologies and conclude technology and know-how transfers. They're very important elements. The other point I should have made but ran out of time earlier is that it's no use on our continent developing all these skills and training up scientists, but then we can't give them jobs on the continent because there's no sustainable demand. So the other element here is how do we collaborate in terms of skills and expertise transfer, and that would be a big opportunity and is an opportunity within BRICS. I mean, I can tell you by way of example, my company Aspen, we signed up a deal with Serum Institute almost exactly a year ago, in fact. And Serum is the largest producer of vaccines in the world. And we signed up to license four vaccines, all of which have relevance on the African continent, with at least 3 of the 4 are highly relevant to the continent. And with that licensing arrangement comes the technology transfer and the skills transfer as well. So that is where we are placing emphasis in terms of collaboration, intra-BRICS speaking. Thanks very much.
Is that a follow-up question? Okay. Let's first respond to the WTO question.
Thank you, Program Director. I think even Mr. Nicholas was able to answer that one. You know, WTO reform has been an issue for quite some time now. As the African group, or even the group of the G77 plus China, we have a common position on talking about reform, but not taking away the developmental questions that still remain on the table, especially when you talk about special and differential treatment for developing countries and for LDCs in particular, small island developing countries as well. So if you go into a reform that does not speak into developmental needs of our countries, you are just adopting or refusing the right to develop again to our countries. So when you talk about the right to export manufactured pharmaceuticals to countries that have limited or no capacity at all to manufacture that, we are still talking about the developmental aspects that have to be treated at the level of the WTO. a reform has to be always linked into that aspect. I was in the WTO from 2004 to 2010-11, still the Doha development agenda, and I found the Doha development agenda already in place. Of course, there has to be a reform of the WTO, of the way it functions, on how countries have access, even the accession process. The DSB has to be reformed, but also taking into consideration our development needs as a back stage.
Super. Thank you so much, panelists. Those were brilliant questions. Unfortunately, we have to draw this session to a close. But I'm taking the following key messages from the session, which I think were very eye-opening for me. One is that the AFCFTA, though we are so impatient, wanting it to be implemented as quickly as possible, is doing quite a lot to ensure that we enhance intra-Africa trade. But I think you need capacity. You spoke about the various protocols that are in the process of being finalized, which will enable people like Dr. Libya here, who are keen and ready to enter to trade in Africa. So that's one. So the two protocols we refer to, the protocol on digital trade and the protocol on investments and competition to diversify investments in Africa. Those are for me very critical. I also think there is a lot to be commended for countries like Malawi that have taken it into their strides to include how to implement AFCFTA in their long-term strategic policies. Particularly here when you speak about the Malawians, we call it Agenda 2063, Malawi 2063, but also how you started thinking at a practical level, the steps that you need to be taken. So it's not just Malawi, it's a lot of countries, but the examples we had from Malawi are commendable. And AFCFTA will need to help countries fast-track intra-Africa trade. We are aiming, and this is, when I say we, within the UNECA space, our tagline is 100 million entrepreneurs in 10 years. We want more of Dr. Libya in that space. So let us support through multinationals like Aspen, biotechpreneurs to help us reach this target. I did hear, Mr. Stravos, from your presentation that you also read through the Gavi mechanism that will be adopted on the 7th of December, that you are ready to start working with local capacity so that we don't just do a fill and finish job when it comes to vaccination, but we are part and parcel from research to increasing local procurement as well. So all of that is really encouraging, and we are looking forward to working with the likes of Aspen and of course AFCFTA and others to make sure that we increase intra-Africa trade supported through the STI investment. So let's give this gentleman a round of applause, please, as we start the next session. That brings us nicely into the next session. We started talking already about digital transformation to increase intra-Africa trade. So I'd like to call on stage Dr. Lisho Mundia, the Director for Research and Innovation, Ministry of Higher Education, Technology and Innovation in Namibia, Professor Vukosi Marivate, who is joining us online, the Associate Professor in Data Science, and the APSA Chair on Data Science at the University of Pretoria, and then Dr. Zibane Mtlatlapa, the Center Head at the CSIR Center for IR in South Africa. Let's welcome them, please, with a round of applause. thank you so much for joining us, though late in the day, but we will truly value your inputs in the session, so don't hold back. Tell us what you came here to tell us. So I'm going to start with Professor Vukosi Marivate, just to kickstart the discussion. As the APSA Chair of Data Science at the University of Pretoria, you have, from both a research level but also engaging in the continent and in the global space, have witnessed the opportunities and the missed opportunities that Africa has either taken advantage of or have missed completely. So I'd like us to start us off with just 2-3 minute remarks on your impressions on these missed opportunities, but what we can do better as national governments, as the continent as a whole. And then immediately after that, I will ask Dr. Tsibane Matlatlapa, as the center head for the Center for C4IR, to also reflect on
hello, can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you. Yeah, I think.
Oh, okay, so I can go ahead, or you are still introducing the rest? Yeah.
I think you can go ahead. I will introduce the rest as they come through. Please go ahead.
Oh, okay. I thought so we're just going to do, okay, it's fine. Good day, everybody. Sorry I couldn't be there. I'm moving around. There's a lot of activity, obviously, because of the Science Forum Week, and also we have a number of actually AI conferences around the country that are happening. So I find myself being now between 3 venues that are 70 kilometers away from each other and having to drive and deal with. So this one, it was just better to be here. So like I thought to maybe put this in perspective, and is to provide. Sorry, cool. This part of, hey, one of the things that we can focus on as a continent is really looking at community building and how grassroots have actually been very transformative in building up science in this way. I'll skip this, but the most important thing here is that yes, I'm at the University of Pretoria, but I also co-founded the Deep Learning Endeavor, which is the premier AI research conference on the continent, which was first sponsored by the DSI, and we're very thankful for their initial funding, and Masakane, which is a distributed research lab with over 2,000 researchers working on AI and African languages on there. I'm joining in today actually from the lab in Joburg, which is an AI startup based in Johannesburg, but it's Pan-African on this one. I'll skip that. Look, the too long and the message I think I want to send out, we must support grassroots on the continent, because I think they are much, much further than the government. They are much, much further than private industry on the continent, and even academia, just because they've looked at some of the wicked challenges that we have, and I think have been even discussed today in the previous session about seeing how you grow by being able to start from scratch and just change the model, not worry about the historical kind of baggage that we have or things that could come in, but then just saying, how do you become inclusive? How do you get people to work and actually make impact and just get on with it? And then secondly, we must collaborate radically. It is not supposed to be a thing that we add on. It should be their base and foundational on there. I'll skip any of this. But for example, if I think about challenges with working on language and building AI for our languages, what you find is that you don't have enough resources. It's hard to discover resources. It's hard to reproduce a lot of the research in the spaces. People don't want to focus on African languages because internationally you want to get into the journals and conferences, the big ones. In English, or we're in English. Masakani really changed a lot of that, and the scale and complexity that comes in. So if you build grassroots, you first get all of these features as part of that. They're inclusive, systemic issues, holistic, collaborative, multi-institutional, and then community focused. So as I said at the Deep Learning Endeavor, we started that to say, this is back in 2016. How do Africans become critical contributors, owners, and shapers of the coming advances in AI? And I stand to believe that those advances are here, and the reason we're having this session as well and thinking about our young people is that now we're dealing with the challenges that come with this. So the first endeavor was in VET, in 2017 with about 300 people. Second one in Stellenbosch, then Nairobi, 650. Last year we were in Tunisia after COVID, and this year we were in Ghana with about 800 people. 3,000 people applied to come to this R&D meeting, and it's very, very much diverse in terms of who you see there. It's typically not who you see at international AI conferences, because they're not really as inclusive on there. And one of the things that's on there, because we were able to build these grassroots from scratch, we have 800 attendees and almost half of them being women, working on cutting edge AI within these perspectives. With Masakani, we did the same kind of thing, but then doing R&D, not just the conference part, but then actually distributed research where people work together on research projects. And this year we were able to gather at the ICLR, which is probably the premier AI conference in the world. For the first time it was in Rwanda on the African continent, and we were able to take up the biggest workshop venue. So the largest workshop at that conference was actually the African one. That shows you that we lead in these spaces of building alternative ways to do research and actually build on. The Masakani itself has become a force to be reckoned with when it comes to research, building up lots of research. This is the first paper that came out of the network. You can see how many people on that paper, and it ended up winning the first Wikimedia Research Award from Jimmy Wales, the founder of Wikipedia, for democratizing the internet. And since then, the Masakani has continued on building, and becoming really a way for the rest of the world to learn how you can do research that is participatory, and then build up to get these things going. The other side, there is AI policy that still needs to catch up in some ways, and we've been working, for example, in the AU and APAC on actually writing a white paper for Africa for AI, and this actually has taken into account the grassroots. We have Data Science Africa, Deep Learning Indaba, Masakani, at Global Pulse, Kampala, being kind of in this space. I will leave it at that, but the last thing I wanted to have everybody take away, sorry, given the time, was African AI has always been there, and we can't also afford to just be receivers of technology. We need to play a role in expanding deep R&D on the African continent in AI in a very meaningful way. And some of it is also getting private industry to just not be sitting waiting on the sidelines. What is it, South Africa? The private industry is sitting on 1 trillion rand in their banks, and not really, like if you took just 1% of that and put it in R&D in general, not just AI, it would really unlock great growth, especially in GDP. There's still much to do, and we need to experiment our way forward. We need to support the grassroots organizations and actually make Africa a better environment for young people to stay, work, and grow. We can't just have Africa for trade, for goods to move around. We need to have movement of people, better immigration for services. South Africa sits at a very great opportunity that we have very good universities. Yes, we have an energy issue, but actually in context, we actually have very good electricity, we have good internet, but at the moment, we can't attract AI researchers here because visas take forever. And how then do we make sure that people can work? And this also unlocks new industries in the country, right? Because a lot of the tech companies that actually, even in South Africa, don't do any R&D. They do not actually do tech at all. They're just there selling what is made in Europe, what is made in North America to us, and we're not actually shaping this. So we need to shape this revolution for ourselves, and so that we can co-create this joint future. We can't just choose only one lane. That's what I'm trying to tell a lot of young people on the continent. We have to solve everything, everywhere, all at once, because 5 years from now, this opportunity will be gone, and we will be so behind in thinking about the future of the continent and its growth and really meeting the needs of its young people. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Maribate, for your thoughts on the work that you do, especially the work on Masakane and the deep learning in Daba. And I think what stood out for me is on the opportunities. Expanding deep R&D in AI is one of the things that you have indicated there, but also co-creating a joint future for Africa's participation in AI. So we'll come back to you with some questions, but let us now go to Dr. Ntlatlapa, just to share a few words on the CSIR, but also just general high-level remarks based on AI for Africa. What are the opportunities that you see? Thanks.
Thanks, Program Director. Let me start with the CSIR. It's a center that is constituted to enable faster adoption of the digital technologies. So we know that they are already there. There's a lot of digital transformation there. So it's just to accelerate that uptake. And what that means could mean that we just don't have the models for implementation of that, or maybe we don't have the regulations or the policies, and where we see the gaps that are preventing us from uptake, then we address those particular gaps. And the center is a South African center, but it has an outlook on the African continent. So there are a lot of the engagement that we're doing with the other African countries to see how we can harmonize those particular rules. So maybe that brings me to the aspect that is closer to the topic here. And the topic that I had in mind did not talk to AI because I knew I had Professor Marvetti in the panel, and I knew he's going to address that part. So I took a different turn, and in the previous session, my group Prof highlighted one of the areas that I wanted to talk about, but I'm just going to touch it on a little bit. It's around the digital transformation that will enable the internet. And the example that he used was a lot around the logistics issue. Because that one you have to cross different borders. And this is the biggest problem that we have today. That you have to have multiple processes just to cross between two countries. If you want to see for yourself, just go to the closest border. Here you go to the border into Mozambique and you see the line of trucks that are there in terms of the processing that has to go there and spend days there. So it's that issue of how do we actually digitally transform that particular process such that you don't actually even have to do certain things right there in the border. There's a lot of information that you have, and what that requires is that we should be able to trust each other such that we can share data across different countries. So the cross-border data is a very key element to enable that. The second part is that you need to know who you are trading with. So you need to identify that particular thing. So there has to be a way in which we can digitally identify ourselves and have a common protocol on the digital identity that we can have so that you know who's the person that you are trading with. And digital payments have already been highlighted. If we get those three, if you get them right, they will be as transformative as any railway between countries. They will enable that, whether it's physical trade, it's physical goods, or it's digital goods. But we have to have a trust framework between different countries. Just before I conclude on that, I want to just share with you what is on the ground, what you see. We can talk about that and we can talk about inter-Africa trade. If you take a sample of data protection regulations across different African countries, you see a pattern from and the pattern would form around saying the data localization. And there would be where they said with some conditions you can access data across the borders. But those are not harmonized, those conditions. And this is where the key issue is. What are the conditions that you say you should have? Is the data protection of South Africa equivalent to that of Malawi in such a way that we can have the conditions that allow us to exchange data in there? And that's where we should focus on. It's a small win. If we can focus on those particular conditions because everyone, I think, except Nigeria, who has taken more of a posture of China where you say everything should be processed internally. Almost everyone has the conditions for allowing cross-border data, but those conditions are so different amongst those things. So that's where we need to focus on. That way we can, we won't necessarily have to be talking about this in 20 years from now, still saying how do we then have intra-Africa trade.
Thank you very much, Dr. Ntatapa, for those very practical steps that you can start implementing online to ensure intra-Africa trade. So let me now switch to Dr. Lisho Mundia from Namibia to also share his perspectives on this topic, and then we'll take a round of questions, and I have one or two as well.
Thanks. It's always good to be last. Afternoon, everyone. I think I have few pointers that I thought I should really share. And, it's good that the professor started first. But from a government perspective, I think what should be important in all what we are talking about should be a conducive environment, which really we need in many African countries. Even if we talk about digitalization, it's not conducive. We can talk about that, but and that really it lags behind. It holds an African child to benefit from that particular country or countries. So it's very important that we create a uniform environment where it's conducive for every African child to join that digital village. I also wanted to really speak. I know that my good friend from Malawi have spoken about this, but the aspect of advancing standardization and automation of border and custom systems. We have done quite a lot in that, but I think that technology have improved, but we still have some areas that it has not improved. As Africans, we haven't really elevated the relationship in terms of trade because of these systems. I mean, we still use passports, for example, but the developed world will give them one passport. They visit all Africans. No need for visas, for example. But the system that we have created through digitalization allow us to actually get rid of passports. Namibia is doing that. We have recently opened trade with Botswana by using the identity card. You don't need the passport. We are now in discussion with South Africa and Zambia. They are coming to the party. And it's my belief that if we are to talk about digitalization, we start there. There's no need for passports. Technology have advanced. We will not create employment until we invest in our own infrastructure on digitalization. The current trend of really just loaning and borrowing infrastructure is not sufficient. It's not sustainable for Africa. We have to find a way to really collaborate among member states, even if we have to create some joint or multilateral, bilateral infrastructure. It will benefit the African child, and it's good for sustainability. Currently, we are really depriving a very poor African child, because this infrastructure, they force us to even sell gadgets on a higher price. So if we create infrastructure that manufactures, for example, our mobile phones and so forth, they are there for us, and they beat down prices. They bring the competition, and they bring in much needed innovation among our youth and allies. Another aspect that I really wanted to speak to is a universal access and pricing, which I've already touched on too. We suffer a lot in many African countries, to be honest, especially as government officials. Every time we roam these countries, some of the countries, they are not conducive. The roaming charges are just too much. There's a very good example again. Namibia and Botswana is living very good. We are leading in this. We have recently started a negotiation on introducing a uniformity roaming charge between the two countries. And I think that Ape and your team, you can learn from us. Also Malawi, you can learn from Namibia. It's important that we have introduced under SADC, under AU, quite a lot of frameworks under universal access and universal pricing of digitalization. But really, honestly, the implementation have been very slow in many countries. And it's possible. It's possible. We know more anyway. Very few countries now use satellites. We've moved to fiber. I don't see what is a problem, what is a hold-up. But we, as government, we need to enable that environment to be really conducive for the African challenge. There are security concerns. But we have done quite a lot to introduce from SADC, from to AU, even to UN and EU, cyber security frameworks. You will ever face challenges. You will never have it all. We will introduce a very sophisticated system. We have very stubborn professors. Some will just come and challenge you, create something just to disturb the good thing that we do. But that is the reality of life. And that's why we have introduced a framework on which African states can really adopt and introduce law that protects its data and its services. There's really a need to fast-track some of the digital payment system in Africa. We still have countries that users cannot use their mobile phone to even transfer funds to those countries. They still have to go and queue in secondary banking agencies. But these are things that we need to fast track on. It will help with trade. Unless we really take advantage. Many countries have, including, I know Namibia, South Africa, and Botswana. It's no more about connectivity. It's an issue of just owning that primary connectivity to a network. Then you can transfer money. It's not about having your internet and so forth, because we know our environment. Our environment is different. I might have internet, but the next person might not have. So we have those alternatives, and I think it will be good that we uniformity that to benefit everyone. For member states on SACU, on the margin of my talk and the last one, is really to call on the member state on SACU to really reform the SACU agreement. It's very colonial. It's not benefiting to all member states, especially Namibia. Currently, Namibia, we can't manufacture. All the manufacturing cars. Even if we do research on digitalization, that we automate our cars and all that, to To procure that vehicle, it has to touch first in South Africa, and the price just shoots twice or three times. It's not benefiting Namibians, it's not benefiting the African, even the South African. The over 40% that you mentioned here by good counterpart, Ms. Chapa, at least maybe 2% of that could be recruited in Namibia to manufacture cars, manufacture aeroplanes if the environment is conducive. So we must really create that box to review that agreement as a matter of agency. Employment is within us as Africans. The problem we have this colonial agreement that we have become very comfortable to live with, and they are really hampering opportunity for us. We can talk about research, which we need. Research will drive the economy, to bring new solutions, but if the trade industry is not conducive, we are literally holding employment for that use. The last aspect is really research and development. There is a need to create joint research, multilateral research, especially where we can have multilateral research chairs. These are professors we can use to even mobilize resources to develop our industry, digitalization, and trade-related aspects. Currently, we really have been relying on these chairs from international funding. And they come with their conditions. It's really just holidays from my perspective. There's nothing, they don't benefit us. But if we start to design our own research chair, fund them jointly, if Botswana, South Africa, we can create a research chair. I know we tried one with South Africa, and we are still doing the same again. But if we look at creating some of these research chairs, it will really benefit us, and we can develop infrastructure with these research professors. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Mundia, for sharing those experiences from the Namibian government. Yeah, there is a lot we can learn from you, certainly, and we will do that also through our bilateral engagement. So I'm not going to try to summarize now what has been captured, because I think the gentlemen were very clear, straight to the point. But I would like to open the floor for questions, comments, for questions and comments, and then I will pick one or two things that we can.
Say that this is very brilliant. I'm just wondering how we can pursue the propositions from Prof. My dear friend in Ntararapa. He gave me an opportunity when I just arrived from Japan in 2012 to come and land here when it was CSIR /Melaka. We were both very young. I don't know how your propositions, especially the conditionalities to allow the cross-border beyond the digital and data protection acts, which many countries are now doing, Kenya, Malawi, South Africa, and all this. How can we address that? It should be part of the resolution or key outcomes from here. And the digital passports, which is now going to Dr. Risho Mundia, where he says passportless. In other words, the digital signatures and crossover, which relies heavily on the data. And the former presenter who presented there on AI, all this, including artificial intelligence, it cannot survive, it cannot live without data. And the data is the one which we're generating across the borders and everything else. We need a movement. We need a resolution. So it's just the how part of it. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Professor Mkeka. How can Malawi start? Yeah, I will ask Dr. Ntalapa to respond, but we have a digital transformation strategy in SADC that we just adopted. So all of us here, myself, Debia yourself and with Dr. Maseko, why are we not implementing it? Why are we not seeing the easy fix solutions that Dr. Ntatapa spoke about in that strategy? It's a question for another day, but when you go to STC in June, we need to start thinking about this. I'll let him respond, but let me take Dr. Maseko's question as well, so that we can respond to both. The black mic.
Thank you so much for your interventions. In fact, let me say, we are gaining a lot from those conversations. But it's so frustrating when it comes to the implementation. Actually recently, as we were reviewing some of the continental policies, it's clear that when it comes to implementation, it's almost zero, but it's somewhere around 20%. How can we break the silos mentality? Because what I have noted is that, yes, we have international partners, but how can we ensure that we engage them as a group? Because what I've noted, they even make it easy, or we even make it easy for them to isolate us. Why am I saying that? You find that, let me make an example. Now that we know the benefits of the SEZ, you find that we have signed agreements at international level which are prohibiting us from establishing or operationalizing those SEZ. For instance, in our country we are reviewing the SEZ policy, but as we're reviewing it, then we realize that there are some agreements that we have signed and we can't take decisions, like maybe in terms of taxes. We can't say the tax is going to be 7%. Now, as we're doing that, someone out there was keeping track. But remember, you have signed this agreement. You can't make your taxes, you can't make them to be 7% or so. Remember, you have to fulfill. Again, when it comes to, okay, the SEZ, we are going to ensure that we attract foreign direct investment in terms of maybe agriculture or pharmaceuticals. Then somebody will come and say, no, remember you signed that agreement, but I'm not sure. How can we ensure that as we go maybe to UN, already we have maybe points that we have a concept note as Africa, as SADC, which we can use just to engage our partners, which we value so much. Because really, even in terms of research, you find that they are, like they are saying, they are funding research that is of interest to them. At the end of the day, when you say, no, we want to do research on, let's say, digital technologies, we want to tap into some of the digital technologies like artificial intelligence, machine learning, then somebody is trying to block you because already we are the major market for them. So what do we do?
Implementation, segregated, incoherent policies and agreements. Where do we start? Namibian experience maybe can help. But let's start with Dr. Mkeka's question and Dr. Ntatapa.
To some extent, there's a link between the two questions, but maybe addressing the one of Prof directly. I think the first point has to be the mindset that we have. We can sit in all of these things and have all these agreements, but if you don't have the correct mindset, we have to understand why we are doing things. So I'll give you an example with something that has not come through now, that is still being in negotiation. There's a negotiation on digital trade under the ACFTA. It's been going on for some time now, I think for over a year, and probably is going to go for the next year as well. Right? You sit in the meetings and you understand when people are doing the interventions. There's a feeling that it's us. And everybody will say, our protection law says this. This is what we do. This is ours, right? And you are sitting here trying to do something for all of us in the room, and everybody then is talking about them only. And maybe that issue of the mindset will come through when you think about some years back in the 80s and the early 90s, when the Europeans were sure that individually they cannot match the US. And they wanted to make sure that they can trade with the US in a way that it can benefit them. And they created a bloc where they talk as a bloc when it comes to that. So most of the things they'll come and do them as a bloc. So that's the mindset that they have. And they will say in EU, if you're going to trade in EU, it doesn't matter which area, which country you are going to, if you are going to do EU, this is what you do in EU, right? So the moment we can get out of and say, this is what you do in, in Africa, and then we look at ourselves saying, how do we then trade with others outside? When we have that mindset of us together, then we can say, as individual countries, what are the things that we can then agree on that are common? Just like the ones that I've just highlighted, like you just take the data protection laws. They are very specific in terms of what of restricting the cross-border trade. But if we can just take those conditions, just focus on those conditions, we'll find that we'll get a common ground, and that implementation would be easier if we can get that mindset that we are going to look at things that are enabling and simpler things. We can talk about the bigger thing, but the simpler ones we can do that. Perhaps maybe just to finalize on that question is that one thing that you see in Rwanda that we probably should do as cross countries is that the president of Rwanda have said specifically that they want Rwanda to be an experimental place. They're going to experiment with this. And they welcome everyone to come and do this. And they've said digital health is going to be their main thing. And what you see when you get into Kigali now, you find that there's a lot of those accelerators, and people come from everywhere. You meet young people from everywhere. They get into Rwanda, they try those things because they allow the experimentation. So if we can just set up this, as SADC, can we experiment with this? We have the policy, but we are waiting for everybody else to implement individually. Just set up a policy experiment lab and just do it within SADC. That's the practical way that we can get it done.
Thank you very much. Dr. Mundia, you can add to those comments, please.
Yeah, thanks. But her question is more science policy. I think we're speaking Thursday about science policy. I think you'll benefit from that. But just to quickly respond to you, I think what we need is really knowledgeable senior government officials and effective government system. That's what we need. I know that in my years of lecturing some professors can be very stubborn. When they hear international collaboration, they chase papers just to be professors and associate professors and so forth. So when you have knowledgeable senior government official that understands science diplomacy vis-a-vis the best interest of government, you can actually get it right. What we started doing in Namibia, I'm not going to be diplomat about it. I think we spoke about this with DSI in 2021. We have had a request by American embassy. They want European Union. The European Space Agency want to come and fly over in Namibia and come with all the nice jets and all that. And the budget about 100 million euro somewhere there. And so my question was, okay, how much is for Namibia? What are you leaving footprint? The proposal is already approved. I said, no, we need a data center. What is a data center? Then I explained what a data center is. Up to today, they packed and they said, then we spoke, they were coming to you. They will do it from Cape Town. And we said, you are not entering the space of Namibia. Whether you camp in Angola or you camp in Namibia. So this is the level of relationship we need in Africa. If it's not benefiting you, it's not bringing an infrastructure for advancing capacity, just leave it. It's not benefiting. These are awareness things, just aeroplanes sitting in the airplane and then the school kids come, go in. It's awareness. It's nothing. There's nothing. It's not capacity development. So I think we need very strategic individuals in key government positions, but an effective government also that rejects. We have quite few examples in Africa where ministers really takes agenda to cabinet without senior government official who understands what is on the ground. And that is also killing Africa. And so I think I'll stop here, but please join the talk on Thursday. I think it's 9:30 to 10:30, or vis-a-vis 10:30, 11:30 on Thursday. It's on science diplomacy. I'll be speaking. I will talk a lot about these kind of issues. Thank you.
Thank you very much for those inputs and for that advertising session for Thursday. Yeah, so a lot has been said, but I want to take one question from AFCFTA.
I was going to try and respond also.
Yes, please. Go ahead, Kosi.
Okay. Yeah. I think obviously things have to be in some ways practical. We spent the last 2 years working on the APAT AI white paper, and some of the things was obviously having to, in terms of this policy as a foundation for other work, is then thinking about the data policy framework, and actually even going back, I think Talapa talked about this, to the Malabo Convention in thinking about data protection and really getting to a point where we have a single market. You can't have the Malabo Convention being signed in 2014 and only being ratified in early 2023, and then thinking that really we can get to a point where we have a single market on the continent that gets affected quickly. I do understand, and maybe I'm saying it from a perspective of a younger researcher, of saying like, we're not going to wait. It's a complete problem, because if now we are working on joint continental policy, then some countries are going on and saying, okay, we'll do our own things when it comes to the way that AI governance and data governance are going to work. And then the timelines that are being talked about are 10 to 15 years. Why even bother? In that period, at the moment, the cake for AI has already been split. Africa wasn't there. What we're doing is almost fighting for recognition that we have lots of work that's already going on the continent that should be recognized. Not actually that we're going to be able to, be winners in this case. The point is, we don't want to be complete losers. when it comes to this thing. And it's very important. People can identify and say no, but then we've got these digital infrastructures we have to worry about right now before we do that. But AI is very geopolitical. You cannot have countries like the US banning China from buying NVIDIA chips. You can't have lots of questions about where GPU supercomputers are put. You can't have even these countries we're talking about who come onto our continent to actually recruit our young people, because Africa has a much higher, in terms of population growth rate, than a lot of these countries that actually have a lot of the resources to actually do a lot of AI research. So Africa becomes a resource in terms of human resource to poach from. So it's almost like we're having, again, a neo-colonialism when it comes to this thing. So I very much, even when I was sitting in APAD with the AU, of saying we can't wait. Waiting is not an option, and we also can't walk. We have to run when it comes to these things. It's great to hypothesize solving the problems one step at a time, but we have to solve all of the steps at the same time. And this requires then a choice of saying what's our direction as a continent, and we go now. There is no going in 5 steps, there is no going in 10 steps, because the devastation that I think this is going to have on African economies and really the functioning is likely cannot be overstated. Because the pieces have long moved, and we were still, I've sat in AU panels where people don't even know, you have to explain what AI is, but these are people who've been tasked with writing policy. It's a bit, it's jarring, and it's the same thing that has happened in South Africa. I was there when the 4IR policy was coming in. I did present at the 4IR just before the proposal came through at the ministerial quota. And people were still this was just the eve, I think a week or two before the 4IR report came out. And for people who were sitting in that room, for a lot of the policymakers, it was the first time actually being explained to what AI was when I gave my presentation. So this shows, as I say, there's urgency, and I think maybe that's the thing why I took up this invitation, and even now I'm supposed to be in another meeting, and I was supposed to be in other meetings, but to say we need to push this understanding of there's urgency we can't get back from. We built Masakane in thinking about language, when at that time, when you go back to 2019, everybody was asking us why we care about AI research for African languages. I think this goes back to some of the comments that have come from the other panel and people from the floor, of no, people just want to choose a direction that they know they can publish some papers, get some quick grants and all those things. But is it really the problem that we want to be working on the African continent? What about building our own AI for our own African languages, even if it doesn't make any financial sense in the short term? But we know it's a digital infrastructure that if we unlock, will unlock so much across the continent, where everybody can really be comfortable using their own languages, right? Being able to interact. Why is it that you can sit inside the and we are thinking about French, Portuguese, and English, and we're not really saying we can talk with whatever language? Why is it that our presidents can go to the UN and not be able to speak in their own languages? We're not developing the technologies to be able to do this. We're just leaving it that somebody else will resolve it. Woo!
Thank you so much. Thank you so much. So we cannot wait. We cannot walk. We have to run to start implementing our digital transformation policies, but to also not even compete, just to be relevant. We have to start now. So I think the key message that I took personally from the session is that we cannot have ministries of science speaking alone about digital transformation. We have to have ministries of ICT, Home Affairs, Health, Education, all speaking together and implementing these policies that we have put in place. And that goes at the SADC level as well. When we adopt the digital transformation strategy, it was just in the Ministry of Science session. So we have to work in unison in implementing the policies as well. I also think we make things more difficult than they should be. Dr. Ntatapa explained quite easily what needs to happen just to ensure that we deal with cross-border issues. But we have to have trust in how we share data, protocols and policies that talk about data protection and data sharing. The question is, do we have those in the continent, and when do we start the run? I leave that to you. Let's thank the panel as I welcome my DDG to come on stage to chair the next session. Thank you so much. Yes, DDG Tutor, if you can come to the stage, please. Let's welcome you with a round of applause.
Well, good afternoon, almost good evening, everyone. And my first task is to thank all of you for still being present here and the strong commitment you are showing to this very important course. Now, we have two components of the programs left. Most importantly, we're going to conclude with a short review of the current draft declaration, which will constitute our input to the Pan-African Congress. But before we do that, we also wanted to have a feel for the practical contributions different partners can make to move forward the agenda of actively involving the diaspora in African science, technology and innovation. So we're going to go straight, Susan, to the presentation of the African Scientists Directory, which is an initiative the South African government has been supporting through our Academy of Science of South Africa. So I'm inviting Susan Veldsman, who's a senior officer at the Academy of Science of South Africa, who's going to give us a short presentation of the directory. Thereafter, we will take some questions, perhaps from you, see how you can get involved in the directory, and after that, I'm going to invite Mr. Many to speak to us on the draft declaration. So, Susan, over to you.
Thank you, DGG. Good afternoon, colleagues, and thank you very much. As the DDG has said, you know, it's a high level of commitment, so thank you very much for that. I'm just checking to see if my PowerPoint has been loaded, so that I can rush through it faster than the hard train that we have here in South Africa. I've been told to be very quick. Sorry, start. Can you just confirm that my presentation is being loaded? Thank you very much. As said, I will be speaking about the African Scientist Directory and why are we actually demonstrating it this afternoon, and that is just to give you an idea what is perhaps possible within this diaspora for Africa, is that we have created this database which could be a possibility to consider to, sorry, I'm so sorry, I'll learn to drive this car. Thank you very much. So this is how it looks like actually on the web. It's called the African Scientist Directory. And I will leave the PowerPoint slides that it can be shared with you so that you can go and have a look at this directory just to get a sense of what it can and what it can't do. So as it has been alluded to, it has been developed by Academy of Science of South Africa in 2020 with funding from the South African Department of Science and Innovation. So the maintenance and the management is by ASIF since 2021. So each profile submitted is reviewed and edited before it's considered for inclusion, and I think this is very important in this whole world that we live in, that databases, etc., and information is not necessarily trusted. So I think this is what we're trying to create here, is a trusted repository. So we verify each and every profile on the actual platform to make sure that you are who you say you are, and you do what you're saying that you are actually doing. So
So it's governed by particular policies, data privacy policy and end-user policy. That is very important because we need to protect the information that we collect on this database. Otherwise, we actually think that researchers won't contribute then the information to the database as such. So who qualifies as an African scientist? Because that's who this database is for. And so it's the person. So in the past, and this is very important, and that's why we're proposing it at this meeting, is in the past, currently, or in the future, is or will be conducting research pertinent to Africa. The person must be a holder of a PhD in any subject field, and persons with master degrees in the fields of engineering and health will also be considered for inclusion, and the reason for that being that normally in that groups that the level of qualification in masters, they practice on a very different way. So profiles from Africans receive preference, but although it is acknowledged that there are many scientists globally working towards advancing science on the continent who have excellent expertise on African subject matter and who are passionate about African science. So where non-Africans apply for inclusion, they are required to expand on the science work they are involved with as far as Africa concerns in the biography. So that's very important to understand what that distinguish that we're making right there. So what is the aims of the African Scientist Directory? Is to facilitate free flow of scientists and scientific knowledge across the borders, and to promote participation of African scientists in activities of the global scientific community. We get many inquiries from journals to say, don't you have an expert in this particular field, and we refer them to this database. It's a very nice one-stop directory where we have a good understanding of who are the experts in that particular field. So it also then ensure efficient information transfer from the global scientific community to the scientific community in Africa, and the collection and dissemination of any valuable scientific information in Africa. And then to promote and to facilitate the formation of scientific societies and academies within the continent, as well as sub-regional partnerships of the continent. This is quite important. We just had a request the other day from the astronomers, the African Astronomy Association, where they actually want to collect also information on astronomy experts in Africa, so you can actually go and have a look in the field of astronomy. Who are the people listed there? I think there's about 32 people, and they are the most prominent astronomers in Africa as such. As well in the physics field, we also find quite a lot of traction through those groups. So what are the benefits of this directory? It's collaboration, of course. As I said, to build trust, you've got to have a trusted directory, and we have to ensure that this directory is trusted, and to increase the impact and the visibility of researchers, to connect, mobilize, and to centralize all the information of the scientists. Just very quickly, if you want to have a search on this database, there are many ways that you can search. You can search by the author or by the researcher. It's like a Google-like search, or by subject, etc. And then, of course, there's also an advanced one. You can actually drill down in the database as such. We do not disclose personal information through this database, not your email, nothing. We are not allowed to do that through our copy. So and we have different levels. Although we collect a lot of information, we do not showcase all that information when you actually do a search. And just for interest sake, we just drill a little bit down. So there are 2,184 profiles loaded onto this directory. Very interesting. Some male scientists are dominant on this directory. Female, it's growing. We're trying to encourage female scientists to also register. If we look at the research disciplines, this is a multidiscipline directory. It's not just hard sciences, etc. There are also social sciences, arts and humanities, etc. So you can see it's a broad spectrum of fields that's being covered, and the numbers are not looking too shabby in those categories. So this is a wealth of information that we have there. So are the African countries that have contributed to this directory. You can see there's a long tail of those who have participated. Of course, South Africa being one of the highest, and that's just because through our membership and because we're known within the country as such. But then comes Nigeria. Unfortunately, we have a category other, non-African, Kenya, Zimbabwe, Ghana, Uganda, Cameroon. So you can just see the long tail of participating. I think what worries us is if you look at the end of this tail, where there's only one, and we would like to see those numbers growing. I think that's our biggest challenge on the directory, is to make it grow and just to ingest it with expertise information. This always remains very interesting to see what are the ages of these researchers actually joining onto this platform. Of course, 41 to 50 years old, that's the highest category. And then, very interesting enough, the lowest one then is 80 and above. You can see there's a little red stripe there, but we'll share the slides that you can see. Then we recorded how many PhDs, how many master's degree experts on this database. Of course, as I said, PhD, that is actually the major qualification to be on this directory. And I just wanted to highlight this because, as I said, the discussions were in line with should we consider to open up this for the diaspora with African researchers. What is it that we need to do? You cannot see it, it's fine. And that is really just to show that we'll have to do some drilling down into the metadata of collecting the information, and we'll have to do some tweaks there to be able to record what this particular group might need. So we're putting this forward for your discussion, and I thank you very much then for your time. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Hassan. Don't run away. Very quickly, are there any questions or comments from clarification from the audience? Yes, please.
Thank you so much for such a highly informative presentation. I just want to find out, in terms of raising awareness, are you doing it through the academies of science? Invitation to raise awareness, or maybe, let me put it this way, are you thinking of having, maybe, since this is African regional one, of having national chapters that will feed into what ASAF is doing?
Thank you very much for that question. Yes, we do work through the Academies of Sciences of Africa, and you will also see, and I did not even show you, if you look at who supports this directory and who is endorsing this directory, you will see that NASAC, for instance, AAS, so all those prominent academies are actually endorsing this directory. But you are right, and you're touching upon a point that we are now looking at what is the next level of advertising, marketing, and to get researchers on it. You know, we had a huge thrust, and now it's quiet down, and so now we'll have to look at the next level. What are we going to do? So thank you, Madam.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Hassan, for that presentation, and we certainly look forward to the growth and further development of the directory as an instrument for connecting African scientists, including those in diaspora. We're now coming towards the last item before we have to do closing remarks. If I could call on my colleague from DIRCO, Mr. Mani, just to give us a very short overview of the next steps, how the work will unfold in finalizing the declaration and then leading up to the Pan-African Congress. Mr. Mani, please.
Well, thank you very much. I promise I will not be long. So before, I was hoping we'd finish earlier, but then I think this is good time. Can I just first indicate to my colleague from Togo, if I can have my colleague from Togo here, what are we, John, can I just have your attention? I was just saying, what we think would be useful, instead of collating everything, we'll just indicate the pointers, and with yourselves, we'll pull together the issues that have been raised, because you are the custodians of the process. And then on the basis of that, we'll develop the declaration, which we'll share. But we'll discuss that immediately after this. But the elements that we have picked up here is over and above what the minister said. First, it's a notion of Ubuntu as a notion that should drive our foreign policy perspective, the point that was raised. And then two, key tools for economic integration of the continent and the diaspora, including the Africa Free Continental Trade Area. And then three, the importance of ensuring that Africa achieves health equality, health independence and self-sufficiency with regards to pandemic preparedness and vaccine production. Four, the need to leverage on the cultural power of Africans and people of African descent. And I must just indicate here that I think we need to also make sure that when we are talking about the diaspora, we don't only talk about Africans. The ambassador of Jamaica was quite reminded me of this quite consistently, that we need to make sure that we we're inclusive here. And then the other point is the role of the youth and women that was highlighted, the role of the media, in particular community media and Pan-Africanism, presented as a beacon of hope. And then the seventh element is education as a tool to unlearn and relearn some narratives about the history of the continent, which links with the 2024 African Union theme, which is dedicated to education. And then 8, leveraging the economic power and networks of the diaspora to help achieve Agenda 2063 and socio-economic development. And then 9, African artificial intelligence, the need for increased R&D in Africa for Africa. And then 10, digital transformation, the cross-border movement of data to support and facilitate intra-African trade, physical and digital trade. And then 11, support for easier movement of people to encourage skills transfer. And then 12, the development of technologies, especially through artificial intelligence across departments. So that's basically the summary that we've captured what will be involved in a revised declaration. I just wanted to conclude by saying I think we need to also be very cautious here at DDG that this is a Southern Africa Regional Conference. It's not a SADC. So I think there's a distinction that needs to be made here, so that we do not conflate the two. Some members of SADC are not necessarily members of Southern Africa, the Southern Africa region. That's the only issue that I wanted to raise. Thank you for the cooperation with the department, and also thank you to the teams that have worked behind the scenes, especially the team that we cooperated, that included my colleagues from DECO and also from the Department of Science and Innovation. I also just must thank my brother who didn't sleep literally from Los Angeles, connected flights and came here. And I know this is quite a task to come here. Thank you very much, Professor Nege. We certainly will be looking forward to working together with the team in Lome as well. Dr. Julius Gabi, I will send him a note, and of course Aldrin and the other participants that we wanted to just bring in here. But with all due respect, I do want to acknowledge Ashley here. Ashley has been one of the people that has been very engaging with us in sharing her experiences, as an African American in South Africa. Quite honest, straightforward, but also I think it's important for us to also understand and not to assume that we know
the challenges of relocating to South Africa or vice versa. It's not only South Africa, our colleague from Malawi indicated as well that they also would love to see this expansion of Ubuntu, sharing of experiences. To the diplomatic corps, then I just thinking out of the box, the intervention that was made by our dear colleague from Mexico, I do think that at least from the level of DECO, there are lessons to be learned around the experiences of Mexicans, across the U.S. Some of us have been to the U.S. We know exactly how the treatment of Mexicans is done. In fact, I just noted just now on the social media, there's a massive statement that has been made by one of the current presidential candidates around the issue of Mexicans crossing the border, which is a very unfortunate statement. But that being the case, I think instead of us really, we probably would need to hear from Mexico and other delegations, of course. But I think those are useful lessons so that we do not start something that you've got experience on, and certainly from our perspective. I think when we sit down with our colleagues from Togo, we might need to just see what is that we can learn. But in those few words from the Department of International Relations and Cooperation, we just wanted to thank you very much for attending and being here throughout, and certainly we will hand over to our colleagues from CSIR. Thank you.
Thank you very much, dear colleagues. Then for our final speaker of today, I'm going to call on my colleague, Ms. Manjin Shani, who is the director responsible for African multilateral cooperation, and was also one of the key officials involved in this events organization. To close our event, Andrew.
Thank you very much, DDG. Good evening, colleagues. I think from the Department of Science and Innovation, we would like to appreciate the partnership with DERCO in convening this Pan-African Congress, but most importantly, to thank each and every one of you for staying throughout, and like the DDG indicated, for your commitment in supporting this initiative. So we thank all the diplomatic corps representatives, all the member states who were part of this workshop. But I think most importantly, as we've had enriching discussions throughout the day. I think for us is the issue of what happens on Monday. So I think the most important thing is that we will continue to engage with you, especially with regards to the declaration and with the road to Togo. But I think also with the various thematic actions that we were deliberating on, I think as the African continent, we've got very good policies, but I think the most important thing is that how do we fast track the issues of implementation. So on behalf of the DSI, thank you so much for your participation, but I would also like to echo what Mr. Ndimene has said, to appreciate the teams from both DSI and DERCO that worked tirelessly to put together this enriching program. And I would like to single out the leadership of our DDG, Mr. Dan Dutoy, as well as Ms. Mambe Chaba, and also from the DERCO side, the leadership of Mr. Ndimene, but also thanking the colleagues who were not sleeping over the past few months. I think it's been months they've been having sleepless nights in preparation for this week. So Ms. Tinyikonjongwana, Ms. Tato Moroko, Ms. Matlako, and Ms. Harriet, we really appreciate all your support, and please continue to do the good work. Thank you, DDG. Thank you, colleagues.
Colleagues, that brings us to an end to the proceedings, but please do bear in mind you are all invited to come back tomorrow on Thursday and Friday, because the Science Forum South Africa kicks off tomorrow. Indeed, tomorrow afternoon in this very room will be the opening plenary session, which will see a keynote address by our Minister, Minister Nzimande, and that will include a panel discussion with a range of experts on exactly the topic we've discussed today, the role of the diaspora in advancing African science. So So we look forward to see you back here at the CSIR Convention Center over the next 3 days. Thank you very much again for your attention and support, and I wish you a good evening. Thank you.